Ariana Palacios was born in the late 1980s in Argentina. She was the youngest child of Willie Palacios and Alicia, both Bolivian immigrants who had settled in the province of Buenos Aires in search of a better future for their family. Delicia found work at a lingerie workshop, while Willie, who had arrived in Argentina at the age of 30, spent his life in the funeral business. Although he managed to open his own funeral parlor, it eventually failed, and in his later years, he worked for a prominent funeral home in Buenos Aires that catered to celebrities and well-known personalities. Though little is known about her early years, it was evident that the household atmosphere was tense, with relationships marred by conflict. Some sources revealed that the Palacios children often witnessed their father being violent towards their mother. Tragically, it seemed that Delicia, in turn, took out her frustrations on Ariana. Despite the turmoil at home, Ariana idolized her father, whom she described as a well-mannered and impeccably dressed man. He was strict, but he was the one who granted her permission to attend gatherings and parties with her friends. The relationship between Ariana and her mother was fraught with tension. They often clashed, and during one family gathering, their argument escalated to the point where they shouted at and shoved each other. Family members had to intervene to prevent the situation from worsening. Around the age of 20, Ariana moved out and started living with a man named Luis. At 24, she became pregnant with her first and only child, but soon after she decided to end the relationship with Luis and return to her parents' home. When her daughter was born, the grandparents were overjoyed. They lived in a working-class area on the western outskirts of Buenos Aires. In October 2017, Ariana met Adrian through a dating app, and they began a romantic relationship. Adrian treated Ariana's daughter well, visiting them at their home, and the couple would sometimes spend weekends together at Adrian's house. By this time, Ariana, who was now 30, worked at a call center in Buenos Aires. To supplement her income, she sold clothes online and also offered hair straightening services, making her very active on social media. Her daughter, now 6 years old, was the apple of her grandparents' eyes. However, it was noted by some that Willie seemed to have an unhealthy obsession with his granddaughter, often hovering around her as if he and Alicia believed they were her parents. This added further strain to the already fragile relationship between Ariana and her mother. On August 28, 2019, Ariana had a heated argument with her mother and told a friend that she needed to talk. On top of that, she also had a bitter dispute with her boyfriend, Adrian, which left her in tears. The next day, Ariana's phone went silent, and no one heard from her again. Her sudden disappearance, coupled with her absence from social media, alarmed her close friends, who immediately began searching for her. In the days that followed, the events surrounding Ariana's disappearance became increasingly strange. Adrian was one of the first to contact the Palacios family, and when he spoke with Willie, he was met with various excuses and evasions. Willie told Adrian that Ariana had found a new partner, decided to change jobs, and no longer wanted to continue their relationship. He even suggested that Adrian should move on and not worry about searching for her, claiming that she needed a fresh start but would be fine with her 6-year-old daughter. The conversation left Adrian uneasy. It seemed odd that his girlfriend's father was urging him to stay away, especially since Ariana, with whom he would have celebrated 2 years of dating on October 14th, had given no indication that she wanted to end their relationship. As days passed, Ariana's friends grew increasingly frustrated as they tried in vain to contact her. Unable to get any response, they began reaching out to her parents' home, with some even visiting in person to inquire about her. Willie was always the one to answer, providing a variety of bizarre and contradictory explanations. Initially, he claimed that Ariana's phone had broken, preventing her from contacting anyone. Then he told someone else that she had gone to another city to sell some products. To another friend, he suggested that Ariana was likely with a new boyfriend, as she had a habit of frequently changing partners, and that was why she wasn't responding to anyone. As her friend's desperation grew, the family's apparent lack of concern only deepened their worry. They started coordinating among themselves, reaching out to Adrian and even contacting Ariana's co-workers in search of any information. When they spoke to her colleagues at the call center, they learned that Willie had visited the office days earlier to inform them that his daughter had traveled to Tierra del Fuego, one of Argentina's most remote provinces. Noelia, who had been Ariana's close friend since childhood, took it upon herself to lead the search for her missing friend. She was well aware of the tensions between Ariana and her mother, the deep love Ariana had for her daughter, and the frequent arguments she had with her boyfriend. Despite these issues, Ariana had never expressed a desire to flee, making her sudden disappearance all the more puzzling and alarming to Noelia. Determined to take action, Noelia reached out to two mutual friends who were also concerned. The three of them, like amateur detectives, set out to piece together the clues. They spoke with Adrian, who confided in them that he found Willie's behavior highly suspicious. As concern grew, Ariana's friends began applying pressure on her family. They called daily, knocked on the door repeatedly, and persistently asked for information, urging the family to report Ariana's disappearance to the authorities. They were convinced that Ariana would never abandon her daughter for such a long time without any contact, especially since she was always attentive to her needs. The situation seemed increasingly bizarre. When asked about Ariana's whereabouts, Willie would offer vague and unconvincing explanations, often stating that she had left to clear her head and that it was better for her to forget about her troubles with Adrian. However, the Palacios family consistently refused to involve the police. On September 19th, nearly 20 days after her disappearance, Ariana's phone suddenly became active again. At precisely 11:32 a.m., a text message was sent to her friends. To everyone's surprise, the message claimed that Ariana was fine but unable to respond further. Each of her friends received a generic message, something Ariana had never done before. The unusual wording of the message, including the phrase, "How are you, dear?" a term Ariana disliked because she found it insincere, only heightened their suspicions. As the friends pressed the family to report the disappearance, Willie warned them that contacting the police could lead to Luis, Ariana's ex-partner and father of her daughter, seeking custody of the little girl, thereby separating her from her mother. Reluctantly, Willie decided to file a report with the authorities, but instead of reporting his daughter missing, he filed a complaint against her friends, accusing them of harassment. Despite the family's resistance, Noelia mustered the courage to go to the local police station to report that her friend had been missing for over 20 days without any explanation. However, she was met with a wall of bureaucracy and indifference. Initially, the police dismissed her concerns, insisting that only a close family member could file such a report. Even after explaining the strained relationship with Ariana's family, the police were uncooperative. After days of persistence, on the afternoon of Wednesday, September 25th, Noelia returned to the precinct with evidence, showing the social media posts she had made about Ariana's disappearance. It was only then that the police took her seriously and initiated an official investigation into Ariana's whereabouts. A few days later, the most shocking and horrifying revelation came to light within Ariana's family. Under mounting pressure, Willie broke down and confessed to his son Mauricio that on the morning of August 28th, he had killed Ariana during a heated argument, stabbing her with a knife. He then buried her body in the backyard of their home. Mauricio, who had always had a strained relationship with his father and knew of his violent tendencies, was stunned by the confession. He immediately went to the authorities and relayed everything Willie had told him. The prosecutor ordered the immediate arrest of Willie and the preservation of the crime scene. Willie, 62 years old, was arrested and charged with aggravated homicide, both due to his relationship with the victim and the fact that the crime was femicide. During his interrogation, Willie confirmed his earlier confession, admitting that he had attempted to cover up the crime by providing false leads and contradictory stories to Ariana's friends. He revealed that he had purchased a new phone, inserted Ariana's SIM card, and sent text messages pretending to be her, all while she was already dead. Willie explained that the murder took place while his wife was at work. After killing Ariana, he buried her body in a secluded part of the backyard, covering it with plastic sheets that Delicia apparently never noticed. On Monday, September 30th, 2019, police officers, firefighters, and forensic experts arrived at Willie's property to conduct a search. At 10:30 a.m., a police-trained sniffer dog entered the scene and quickly located the spot where Ariana's body was buried. 2 hours later, the experts unearthed her remains from the garden, just a short distance from her former bedroom. It was a grim discovery. The knife used to kill her was still lodged in the left side of Ariana's neck. After nearly 8 hours of work at the crime scene, the partial reconstruction conducted by the police determined that the murder took place inside the house. Forensic tests using luminol revealed positive results on parts of the floor, confirming that the victim's body had been dragged to the spot where her father had buried her. What made the scene even more macabre for the detectives was that Willie had constructed a rabbit hutch directly over the burial site, a place designed for Ariana's daughter and the other grandchildren to play. The forensic autopsy revealed that Ariana had suffered 3 stab wounds to the left side of her neck. While 2 of the wounds were superficial, the third severed the carotid artery and also damaged the larynx, leading to her death within moments. At this point in the investigation, detectives had to rule out the possibility of accomplices and clarify many doubts regarding the involvement of Ariana's family circle. It was hard to believe that none of her closest relatives had noticed anything unusual after such a violent confrontation and a horrific crime. Even more striking was the fact that the investigation had been initiated by a friend's persistence rather than by a direct family member. One of Ariana's friends recalled a message from Ariana shortly before her disappearance, in which Ariana mentioned having a heated argument with her mother, hinting that her mother was not who she seemed to be. That was the last message she received from Ariana's phone. The fact that most of the family resisted filing a missing person report was one of the significant questions investigators wanted to clear up. In his statement to the authorities, Adrian highlighted that the relationship between Ariana and her mother had been strained since mid-July. While he never noticed anything particularly strange during his weekend visits, he did observe that the 2 women argued frequently. A crucial testimony in the case came from Nadia, a neighbor in the area where the Palacios family lived. Nadia had several conversations with Willie after Ariana disappeared. On one occasion, Willie came to her house and asked if she could pick up his granddaughter from kindergarten, explaining that Ariana was unable to do so. Although Nadia found it strange, she agreed to help. At that time, Willie mentioned that Ariana had left but implied it was only temporary. Later that day, after picking up the child, Nadia sent a message to Ariana to let her know everything was fine with her daughter, but the message never got through. When Nadia returned the child that afternoon, Willie told her that Ariana had left for good, discarding her phone because she wanted to start a new life. He even mentioned that Ariana had been offered a new job in another city. It also seemed odd to her when, on September 19th, she received a message from an unknown number supposedly from Ariana, saying that she was traveling and focusing on a new boyfriend. The message was full of spelling errors, which was unusual for Ariana. This same message was sent to several of Ariana's friends, and all were incorporated into the case to determine whether Willie himself sent them or if someone else was involved in the deception. Noelia, Ariana's childhood friend, testified that during one of her many visits to the Palacios household, where she urged them to report Ariana's disappearance, Willie dismissed Ariana as a lazy woman who had likely run off with a man, abandoning her daughter. Noelia, who knew her friend well, was convinced this was a lie, as Ariana would never leave without her daughter. One potential trigger for the crime, highlighted by several witnesses during the investigation, was a labor lawsuit that Ariana had filed years earlier, which she appeared to be close to winning. Ariana had mentioned to several friends that once she received the settlement, she would rent a place to live alone with her daughter. Investigators hypothesized that Willie may have committed the crime to prevent Ariana from taking the child away, as various testimonies suggested he had an unusual obsession with his granddaughter that went beyond typical grandparental affection. To leave no stone unturned, the investigation stage took 2 years. Finally, on October 22, 2021, the trial against Willie Palacios began. He faced a life sentence for aggravated homicide, considering that the victim was his descendant and that the crime was committed under circumstances of gender-based violence. During the trial, Willie's confession and the extensive evidence gathered by the prosecution were presented. Initially, Willie was present in the courtroom, but at the request of 2 witnesses for the prosecution, he was asked to leave and listen to the proceedings from an adjacent room. Key witnesses in the trial included Delicia, the victim's mother, who by then had become Willie's ex-wife, and Mauricio, Ariana's brother. What the judges heard from Delicia, who was ultimately not charged as an accomplice, was a chilling account of her 43-year relationship with the aggressor. Throughout her testimony, Delicia never referred to her ex-husband by name, only calling him "that man," and recounted years of domestic abuse she endured while they were together. It seemed that the Palacios household had turned into a living nightmare starting in July 2019, when Willie lost his job and his violent behavior escalated. According to Delicia, Ariana and Willie frequently clashed due to their strong personalities. She also mentioned that her granddaughter was Willie's weakness. He had a disturbing obsession with her and would often scream during arguments with Ariana that no one would ever take the child away from him. Within the family, Willie's initial explanation for Ariana's absence was that he had kicked her out of the house. Since Willie was unemployed, he spent all day at home, taking care of his granddaughter and managing the household tasks while Delicia worked late into the night. This routine did not arouse suspicion, even when changes were made to the backyard. However, as time passed, doubts began to emerge from various quarters, not only from Ariana's friends and boyfriend, but also from her family, including Delicia. She became increasingly anxious and confronted Willie, asking why he had thrown Ariana out of the house. Willie's response was that he had expelled her because she was pregnant again, and he was not willing to raise another of her children. Cornered, Willie resorted to a final twisted strategy that ultimately exposed him. Willie first went to the police station to report that his daughter was in the south of the country, but that he had lost contact with her and feared she might have fallen victim to human trafficking. He even wrote and signed a letter, pretending to be Ariana. What he didn't anticipate was that Delicia would immediately recognize the handwriting as not belonging to her daughter. Mauricio was the next witness to take the stand. He recalled being surprised when his father invited him to lunch, given their strained relationship and the fact that they hadn't seen each other in years. Mauricio also recounted numerous instances of his father's violent behavior towards his mother and sisters. After hearing these crucial testimonies and reviewing the overwhelming evidence against him, it was time to listen to the defense. Willie's defense claimed that everything began with an argument. Willie allegedly slapped Ariana, who then grabbed a sharp kitchen utensil. They struggled, and Willie managed to take the weapon from her, ultimately injuring her in the neck. The defense argued that Willie acted in self-defense, asserting that he had no choice but to protect himself. On October 26 of that same year, the judges sentenced Willie to life imprisonment. The court found him solely responsible for the aggravated femicide. After hearing the sentence, Willie uttered a few brief words apologizing to his ex-wife, his family, and his daughter's friends, expressing regret for what had happened, and then fell silent. One of the judges emphasized that Delicia's testimony had revealed a family structure plagued by violence. This brutal environment normalized the conditions that eventually led to Ariana's death at the hands of her father. The judges unanimously agreed that Delicia's account was honest and free of inconsistencies, even though it carried an emotional weight of guilt, as her efforts to keep her family together had ultimately led to the worst possible outcome for her daughter. The reading of the sentence concluded with the judge's observation that although the life sentence couldn't undo the harm done to the family, it would free Delicia and her remaining children from the hell they had endured for years. But this wasn't the last blow Willie Palacios would receive. Believing himself to be the rightful guardian of his granddaughter, he was informed that Luis, his granddaughter's father, had requested custody and been granted it. Luis had also explicitly requested that Willie be denied visitation rights, a request the court agreed was in the best interest of the child. For the obsessed grandfather, this punishment may have been even worse than the life sentence itself. Gail Katz was born on March 8, 1956, in New York, USA. She was the first child of Manuel, an advertising executive, and Sylvia, who juggled managing the household and working in a hospital's emergency department. When Gail was just 2, her sister Elaine came along, and the two became inseparable. The family lived in Brooklyn until Gail was about 9, and then they moved to Long Island, where her brother Steve was born in 1970. Life in the Katz household was a bit rocky. Manuel had a strong personality and could be pretty tough on everyone, especially during arguments which often ended with days of silence despite sitting together for meals or watching TV. Gail was a star student and graduated from high school in 1973. She then went to the State University of New York in Albany. Despite her smarts, Gail struggled with insecurities and often felt down. Her love life was a roller coaster. She took breakups hard. After nearly 5 years at university, she grew disinterested in her studies, started experimenting with drugs, and even ended up in the hospital after a serious attempt on her life. Her parents were really worried about her and tried to help, but it usually ended in heated arguments. Hoping for a fresh start, her mom suggested she should try to settle down, ideally with a doctor, thinking it would give her a more stable and luxurious life. But Gail wasn't into that idea. Instead, she moved to Manhattan and joined a dance program at New York University. She was talented, but her lack of confidence got in the way, and she eventually dropped out. Not giving up, She then tried social work but soon felt it wasn't right for her either. Gail returned to Albany and started exploring her artistic side by dating a musician. They experimented with music and choreography, but it wasn't quite the right fit. Then she met Amanda, a band member who played guitar and synthesizer. They clicked instantly, becoming close friends and trusted confidants. At this stage in her life, Gail faced a dilemma. She was torn between following her mother's advice to settle down with a professional partner or continuing to pursue her creative passions. In her search for clarity, Gail turned to a therapist, hoping to find guidance in making these life decisions. Despite the therapy sessions, she found it challenging to set a clear path for her future and defaulted to searching for a partner as a temporary solution to her indecision. By 1979, at 23 years old, Gail was doing odd jobs in Manhattan and spending her leisure time at a popular dance club in Albany. It was there, through Amanda, that she met Robert Birnbaum, a charismatic recent medical school graduate who was a year older than her. The attraction was immediate, and they quickly developed a deep connection. Robert was born on July 22, 1955 in Newark, New Jersey, into a Jewish family. His father was a respected cardiologist, and his mother helped manage his thriving practice. The family lived in a prominent white house in West Orange, a short distance from Newark. Recognized for his intellect from a young age, Robert was the standout student in his science classes. At just 7, he was the youngest participant in an astronomy course at the planetarium in Manhattan, mingling with adults. During his adolescence, he also pursued artistic interests, taking lessons in piano and guitar. Robert attended high school in West Orange, excelling academically and frequently topping the honor roll. He aced his college entrance exams, scoring 800 points, a testament to his intellectual prowess. He enrolled at Albany Medical College and completed the typically 8-year program in just 5 years, thanks to his exceptional memory and self-confidence. Alongside his academic and artistic pursuits, Robert also engaged in judo, mastering various combat techniques, including those used to incapacitate an opponent, which hinted at a complex blend of interests and abilities in his character. Robert was also passionate about flying, and while studying medicine, he completed all the necessary courses to obtain his pilot's license for light aircraft. Furthermore, he dreamt of becoming the first Jewish astronaut. Robert could be described as the complete package. He was handsome, charming, well-educated, cultured, and sensitive. Besides his surgical residency, he was fluent in 5 languages, loved gourmet cooking, and enjoyed judo, skiing, playing guitar, and flying light aircraft. He had a charismatic personality, was extroverted, and spoke fluently. He was every woman's dream Prince Charming. Robert was known as a romantic among his close circle. Often he would invite the women he was courting to join him for short flights in his plane. Most were charmed by his allure and the marvelous experience of seeing everything from above. When Gail met Robert, her mother's advice echoed in her head, and she quickly concluded that he was the right person to start a family with. The couple went on several dates and flew through the clouds during their romantic flights. Robert became a great support for Gail, who came from a background filled with difficulties. His presence improved her self-esteem and made her feel more confident about herself. As time passed, their relationship grew stronger and became more intimate. Eventually, their love led them to formalize their engagement. Their bond was very solid, and their inner circle described it as something magical. Gail's parents were delighted with Robert, seeing him as the ideal husband for their daughter, not only because of his many attributes, but also because of his medical background. They believed a great future awaited them. However, as the saying goes, appearances can be deceiving, and behind his magical and attractive facade, Robert hid a sinister side. He was controlling, possessive, and prone to anger. Some people close to him had witnessed this side of him, which began to gradually show in his relationship with Gail. Initially, the changes in his behavior were almost imperceptible, but one day an incident occurred that revealed what Robert was capable of when overcome with rage. In a fit of jealousy, he attempted to drown Gail's cat in the toilet of their apartment. Fortunately, she arrived in time and managed to save the cat, which was still meowing in fear the next day. Overwhelmed by distress, Gail called her sister and told her what Robert had done. Together, they took the cat with the intention of bringing it to a shelter, as Gail thought it best to give it up for adoption. During this critical time, her sister took the opportunity to advise Gail to end the relationship and keep her pet. However, Gail loved Robert and was convinced that her love could change him, and that together they could be a happy couple. She believed it was just a matter of having patience and persevering. On August 29, 1982, after a brief engagement and just a month after the cat incident, Gail agreed to marry Robert. The young couple vowed eternal love in a beautiful ceremony held in a synagogue. Until the last minute, Elaine persistently asked her sister to distance herself from Robert, but Gail's response was always the same. She felt she had everything under control. Whenever Elaine brought up the subject, Gail insisted she didn't want to ruin the occasion. She reminded her that the wedding invitations had already been sent out and that all the preparations for the celebration were in place. Moreover, Gail often reiterated that she truly loved her fiancé and would do whatever was necessary to help him change. Gail failed to realize that she was normalizing certain behaviors that seemed harmless, but were actually warning signs of danger. For example, instead of choosing her own wedding dress, she wore the gown her mother-in-law had worn at her own wedding. Despite not liking it, she wore it to ingratiate herself with her, with Robert, and with the rest of his family. Unfortunately, contrary to Gail's expectations, her love was not enough to help her husband, and within a few months of marriage, the atmosphere at home had become very oppressive. Arguments became more frequent. The couple began to cross the boundaries of respect and entered into a love-hate relationship. Friends and family became aware of this situation and could see the excessive control Robert exerted over his wife. He decided on the hairstyle she should wear and her clothing. She had to do everything as he wanted. She was essentially subjected to her husband's decisions and had no voice of her own. According to some acquaintances, Gail began to feel uncomfortable in her own home. She spent a lot of time alone because Robert had long work hours at the hospital, but when they were together, problems arose. When he returned home, the doctor wanted to rest and not spend time with his wife. Gail, for her part, was disappointed. The doctor's salary did not allow her to have the lifestyle she thought she would enjoy, nor did she receive the attention she expected. Indeed, financial issues and the status of the couple were factors of conflict. Gail felt a bit more at ease when her in-laws leased a new apartment in a prestigious area of Manhattan, to which they moved in January 1983. Around this time, Robert insisted that his wife return to university. His efforts paid off, and she decided to resume her studies in psychology. For a brief period, the glamorous apartment, as well as the academic focus, helped Gail feel more settled. That was a time when things functioned better for the couple, but unfortunately, the calm did not last long and was soon replaced by intense arguments. Neighbors of the Birnbaums were witnesses to the situation. A person living in the apartment below commented that they did not need to check a calendar to know what day of the week it was because, almost religiously, the couple would have heated arguments every Sunday. On that day, the only day both were home at the same time, the differences between the spouses became more irreconcilable and cohabitation increasingly difficult. They then decided it was time to seek professional help and scheduled an appointment with a couple therapist. The therapist first met with Robert and, at the end of the session, told him he could leave. She then spoke with Gail and advised her to distance herself from her husband because her life was in danger. Despite warnings, Gail didn't take the advice seriously and brushed off the recommendations. After their sessions, the therapist decided to refer Gail and her husband Robert to a psychiatrist named Michael. By November 1983, Michael had met with them multiple times, both individually and together. He even talked to their parents and quickly figured out that Robert could be a real danger to Gail. He strongly suggested that Gail should leave her husband to avoid serious harm or even worse. But again, she didn't buy into what the expert said. She couldn't see Robert as a threat and chose to stay with him. Michael was so sure about his diagnosis and what needed to be done that he wrote up a document. It laid out all he knew about Robert's personality and the risks of staying together. He also included a note in the document to clear himself from any responsibility if anything bad happened to Gail. He tried to get her to sign it, but she wouldn't. Even though she ignored the advice from both doctors, Gail talked about what went on in the therapy sessions with several friends and her sister. They all thought she should listen to the experts and break it off with Robert, but she didn't listen. In the next few months, things between Gail and Robert just drifted along. Robert was busy with long hospital hours. Gail was caught up with her classes and therapy, and their weekends were filled with arguments and money worries. On July 7, 1985, it was Robert's nephew's birthday party in New Jersey. Robert went to his sister's house for the celebration alone, telling everyone that he and Gail had had a fight, which was why she didn't come with him. The party went on as planned. After the party, Robert made a quick stop at the home of Dr. Scott, one of his good friends. Robert explained to Scott that he was distressed because he had tried to reach his wife several times through the apartment line, but she did not answer the calls. He also mentioned the heated argument they had that morning, after which Gail left and had not been seen since. After leaving Scott's house, Robert returned to his apartment. There, he made several calls trying to gather information about Gail, as he found the place completely dark and empty. Among the people he contacted was one of his wife's former professors, to whom he explained the day's events. The academic advised him to report to the police and to ask the building's doorman if he had seen his wife. He then shared the same information with his wife's relatives. On the evening of July 8, 1985, almost a full day after he got home and started calling around about his wife's disappearance, Robert went to the police station. He seemed genuinely worried as he explained the situation. He told the officers that after their argument the previous day, Gail left their apartment at around 11 a.m. She hadn't come back by the time he left for a family event at 5:30 p.m. and was still missing when he returned later that night. He said Gail was dressed casually, possibly heading to Central Park. Since Robert was the last person known to have seen Gail, the detective asked him for every detail he could remember to help find her. Among other things, Robert mentioned that Gail had a history of depression and had once attempted suicide, which made him worried she might have hurt herself again. For the next 2 days, the police conducted an intense search for Gail, knowing the first hours were critical. However, Robert wasn't much help to the authorities. Although they left several messages for him starting on July 8th, it wasn't until the following day that Robert got back to them. During that call, he asked about the investigation's progress and agreed to meet with the detective 3 days later to go over everything about the day Gail disappeared. By then, the police were starting to suspect something was off and began to doubt Robert's story. No one could confirm seeing Gail leave the building on the day she vanished. Besides the police efforts, Gail's friends and acquaintances were also desperately trying to locate her. They actively searched and handed out posters with her description, all wondering where she could be and what might have happened. At the time, Gail's sister Elaine was 27 and was studying hard for her final law school exams. Initially, she tried to stay calm, but as time passed without any word from Gail, anxiety overwhelmed her. It seemed out of character for Gail to just vanish without contacting her or anyone else in the family. Elaine was also worried because Gail had missed important appointments with her patients, which she needed for her psychology degree and her own therapy sessions. As days went by, Elaine became increasingly convinced that Robert had something to do with her sister's disappearance. This suspicion wasn't just based on how he acted after Gail went missing, but also on things Gail had confided about her troubled marriage. Gail's parents sat down with their children and one of the detectives for a crucial meeting. During this session, Elaine shared some disturbing incidents involving her sister and Robert. She described a time when Robert caught Gail smoking on the balcony. Instead of just scolding her, he violently grabbed her by the neck and squeezed until she passed out. Gail reported this 4 days later, but eventually dropped the case, and the police didn't pursue it seriously either. She also recalled a dinner at a restaurant where Robert fed Gail a bite and then unsettlingly tried to feed Elaine in the same way, which she found inappropriate and strange. As Elaine detailed these acts of violence and excessive control, Gail's parents grew increasingly convinced that their son-in-law was responsible for their daughter's disappearance. Furthermore, during a visit to Gail and Robert's Manhattan apartment, the family noticed all of Gail's belongings were still there: her purse with her documents, payment cards, cigarettes, and keys. It seemed impossible that she would leave voluntarily without these essentials. This oversight made it clear to the Katz family that Robert might have forgotten to remove these items. Unbeknownst to them at that moment, the search for the truth behind Gail's disappearance would turn into a relentless challenge filled with intrigue and deceptive half-truths. The family and Gail's close friends made several trips to the couple's apartment, creating distractions to keep Robert occupied while they searched the place for any clues or suspicious items. They even went through the trash bins of the apartment complex, hoping to find something that might lead them to Gail or implicate the doctor. Despite all their searching, Gail's family and friends never found any concrete evidence. Wanting to leave no stone unturned, Wayne, Gail's cousin, decided to reach out to two of her past romantic interests who might know something that could help the case. He first met with a psychologist who had dated Gail during a 6-month break from Robert. This man hadn't heard from Gail in days and shared that she had been thinking seriously about leaving Robert to marry him. He felt that if Gail had chosen to leave with someone, it would likely have been him. Next, Wayne contacted a banker who had been involved with Gail before her time with Ken. He was also in the dark about her current whereabouts, mentioning it had been a long while since he last heard from her. For those who loved Gail, fearing the worst seemed inevitable, but they still clung to hope that she might be found alive. However, as days turned into weeks, that hope dimmed even though their resolve to discover the truth remained strong. They kept a close watch on Robert, believing he might eventually slip up and reveal something or make a mistake that could lead them to the truth. Knowing he was under suspicion, Robert hired a lawyer named Scott to safeguard his interests. Tensions between the Katz and Birnbaum's families grew, leading to virtually no communication between them. Gail's relatives were frustrated with Robert's parents, who had suggested to the police that Gail might have run off with someone else or even taken her own life. The Birnbaums, on the other hand, were upset knowing the Cats suspected Robert was involved in Gail's disappearance. Months after Gail vanished with no significant leads, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office took over the case, assigning a chief investigator named Andy. He decided to explore a new angle: Robert's interest in flying. Upon investigating the flight club where Robert rented planes, Andy discovered that on July 7, 1985, Robert had taken out a plane and altered the logbook to show he was flying not just on that day but also on the following day. This led Andy to hypothesize that Robert might have killed Gail, then flown her body over the Atlantic Ocean to dispose of it. The fact that Robert had never mentioned this flight during police interviews made this theory seem all the more plausible. However, the district attorney's office informed the Cats family that without Gail's body and in the absence of conclusive evidence, they could not press charges against Robert. From that point on, the young doctor continued his life as an innocent person with nothing to fear. In February 1987, a new forensic search was conducted with the goal of gathering criminalistic evidence from the aircraft Robert had rented and the car his father had borrowed the week his wife disappeared. During this investigation, luminol, a chemical substance that detects traces of blood on surfaces, was used. Despite these efforts, the authorities found no evidence that the aircraft or the car had been used to transport the remains of a person. In May 1989, nearly 4 years after Gail vanished, a torso was discovered in the waters off Staten Island. To identify it, forensic experts compared old chest X-rays of Gail with the remains. The technician concluded it was indeed Gail's torso, but noted that, according to the study, the remains had only been in the water for about 2 to 3 months. This raised questions about where Gail had been all those years, suggesting she might have been alive until just before the remains were found. For Gail's family, the discovery was heartbreaking but brought some form of closure. After years of uncertainty, they were finally able to hold a funeral service and create a memorial for their beloved Gail. A few months after the funeral, Gail's mother passed away and was buried next to her daughter. The prolonged tragedy and the endless questions had taken a heavy toll on her. Meanwhile, Robert seemed to move on with his life with little outward grief. He continued to socialize and date, frequently attending events in the Hamptons, where wealthy New York families gathered. Eventually, he started a serious relationship with Sandy Schiff, a criminal lawyer from New York who saw him as hardworking, sweet, gentle, and devoted. Sandy believed Robert was very open with her, having shared everything about Gail's disappearance right from the start. Their relationship, which was free from arguments or fear, lasted about 3 years. In the early 90s, Robert moved to the Bahamas to open his own plastic surgery clinic, marking 5 years since Gail's disappearance. Shortly after relocating, he began dating Stephanie Youngblood, a chiropractor. She described their first year together as wonderful. They shared many interests and trips, including a memorable skiing trip to Argentina. The couple also balanced their medical careers with adventure and fun. Later, Robert joined Flying Doctors, a group that transported medical personnel to provide care, particularly to children in Mexico. As their relationship developed, Stephanie became more curious about Robert's past. Eventually, she discovered he had concealed his previous marriage and Gail's disappearance. Robert explained he preferred not to discuss it and asked her to keep this information confidential, claiming it wasn't public knowledge. Despite his vague explanations and scant details, Stephanie chose to believe what Robert told her and continued the relationship. Despite her initial reluctance, Stephanie soon found herself unable to ignore the glaring issues in her relationship with Robert. His temperament flared up publicly on a couple of occasions, leading to outright attacks on Stephanie. After a particularly alarming incident, she convinced him to see a specialist. It didn't take many sessions before the therapist pointed out Robert's volatile nature and advised Stephanie to keep her distance, citing her safety. Her gut feeling and the professional's advice prompted Stephanie to end the relationship. Meanwhile, the Katz family suffered yet another loss in 1994. It had been 5 years since Gail's burial and her mother's death when Manuel, the family's patriarch, passed away. The only consolation for the family was that both parents had lived to see their daughter laid to rest. The next year, a decade after Gail's disappearance, Robert started a new chapter in Las Vegas with Janet Chalet, an obstetrician and gynecologist. Their relationship moved quickly to an engagement. Around this time, Robert secured a copy of Gail's death certificate in New York. While he had mentioned his missing wife to Janet, he hadn't disclosed the suspicions that surrounded his past. Confronted with the death certificate, Robert shared more details about Gail, which Janet accepted, moving forward with their wedding plans. In 1997, as forensic technology advanced, the district attorney's office decided to re-examine Gail's case, which had been filed away as unsolved. They exhumed the remains for new tests, which shockingly revealed that the remains weren't Gail's. A year after this discovery, Robert and Janet married and relocated to Mayville, North Dakota, where he had accepted a new job. Their joy grew when they welcomed a daughter in 1998. Robert, having always wanted a family, cherished his role as a father. Since becoming a lawyer, Elaine had committed herself to uncovering what happened to her sister. Working closely with Michael, the psychiatrist who had treated Gail, she vowed to keep pursuing the truth. As a lawyer who often represented children in divorce cases, Elaine's professional skills aided her personal quest. She continually monitored Robert, investigated various theories about Gail's fate, and periodically shared her findings through articles in the press, maintaining hope that the truth would eventually emerge. Elaine actively reached out to various media outlets, including radio stations and television networks, understanding the significant impact they could have in keeping her sister's case in the public eye. She also communicated with the residents of the Manhattan building where Gail had lived with Robert, as well as the hospitals where Robert was affiliated, ensuring that the community saw him as a suspect in Gail's disappearance. As the investigation gained momentum, the police revisited several witnesses, some for the second time. A few women who had dated Robert after Gail vanished came forward to revise their earlier statements, offering a more candid perspective that added depth to Robert's profile. One key witness was a woman who had a romantic relationship with Robert starting in September 1985, just months after Gail's disappearance. She moved into the Manhattan apartment and shared with the police her belief that Robert knew how to dispose of a body by dropping it from an airplane, a theory the investigators were already considering. This aligned with the altered flight logs, which Robert had changed to make it look like he flew the day after Gail went missing. The alteration was conspicuous, done in a different color ink. With new evidence, including the altered flight log and testimony from Dr. Michael Stone regarding Robert's psychological profile, prosecutors charged Robert with second-degree murder on December 8, 1999. At the age of 45, the now prominent plastic surgeon appeared in court alongside his lawyer and wife, pleading not guilty. Bail was set at $500,000, which his father paid, allowing him to stay free during the trial. As the trial date approached, it seemed Robert's luck was dwindling. The trial would be overseen by a judge known as the Iron Princess, for her empathy towards cases involving female victims. Recognizing the formidable judge, Robert's lawyer suggested bolstering their defense with a more experienced criminal defense attorney. A month before the hearing, the judge ruled that Gale's psychiatrists, who had warned her life was in danger, could not testify due to doctor-patient confidentiality rules. The trial kicked off in early October 2000. During the opening statements, prosecutors argued that the marriage between Robert and Gale had ended tragically in a fit of rage, leading Robert to murder Gale and dispose of her body from an aircraft. They stressed that, while there was no physical evidence like a body or blood traces, the motive was clear and compelling. Throughout the trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a day when Gale intended to leave Robert, which, given his controlling nature, was deemed unforgivable by him. In contrast, the defense maintained that the prosecution's story was speculative and aimed merely to explain the disappearance of a woman whose body had never been found. They presented what they believed were logical, exculpatory explanations for Robert's behavior and inconsistencies over the years. Witnesses played crucial roles in shaping the narrative. A defense witness testified he saw Gale with another woman at a bagel shop on the day she vanished. His description of Gale's clothing matched what she wore that day, although not her physical appearance. Prosecutors challenged his credibility, suggesting his testimony was vital for the defense but unreliable. Similarly, a beauty salon owner who regularly styled Gale's hair testified about Gale seeking an apartment to move into alone, hinting at her marital problems. She also mentioned Gale's infidelities, noting Gale was very detailed when discussing her romantic life. The jury also heard about a letter from psychiatrist Michael Stone that detailed allegations of abuse, alongside witness statements about Gale's experiences with her controlling and violent husband. Additionally, the court examined the altered flight log, and the prosecution underscored Robert's inconsistent explanations to various people about Gale's fate, ranging from mental illness claims to alleged involvement in a botched drug deal, or that she had moved to California and was working as a waitress. Though the evidence was circumstantial, the deliberation ended with the jury convicting Robert of second-degree murder after 7 hours. Despite the conviction, Robert continued to proclaim his innocence. A month later, he was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing a somber conclusion to a lengthy and complex case. 15 years after Gale's disappearance, the person responsible had been convicted and was behind bars. Yet the case took a startling turn when, after 20 years in prison, Robert confessed to the crime. It was December 2020, 35 years since Gale had vanished. During a parole board meeting, Robert disclosed that he had ended his wife's life and disposed of her remains over the Atlantic Ocean. He detailed how a heated argument led to uncontrollable shouting, culminating in him strangling Gale to silence her. He then transported her body to a hangar, rented a plane, and dropped her into the ocean, later describing his actions as an immature loss of control. Daniel Bibb, one of the prosecuting attorneys, was stunned by the confession, having thought it unlikely that Robert would ever admit to the crime. Gale's brothers felt a complex mix of emotions. Robert's admission provided a grim confirmation of their suspicions. Though they would never bring Gale back, they felt that she could finally rest in peace, knowing justice had been served. This tragic story underscores how Gale's hopeful belief that love could change her partner ultimately led to her demise.
I think we had a I didn't know what to do. I ran in the house. I grabbed a cloth and put warm water on it and came back and did the same thing.
Did you do anything to harm him?
She is Melissa Turner, on the brink of a nervous breakdown during this interrogation. Stay until the end of the video to uncover the horrifying truth behind this true crime story.
Melissa was born in Tampa, Florida, and from an early age, she found solace in horror and fantasy films due to her shyness. As a teenager, her love for manga and anime ignited a desire to cosplay, but her weight made her self-conscious. Instead of pursuing her passion, she hid her body under layers of clothing and focused on her studies. After graduating with excellent grades, Melissa faced a $26,000 debt. Feeling depressed, she turned to online health and fitness forums, determined to lose weight. Between 2011 and 2013, she successfully lost 90 pounds, gaining confidence and embracing a more daring style. Proud of her transformation, Melissa started sharing pictures on Tumblr, attracting a large following. She also found love and began dating Cameron. In addition to her personal blog, she created a second one with explicit content, featuring herself as various characters. Her growing online presence led her to the cosplay community she had always dreamed of joining. At a party, a friend mentioned making good money through webcam shows. Initially hesitant, Melissa eventually decided to try it to pay off her debts. By 2014, she was juggling 3 jobs, including webcam shows at night. Realizing the earning potential, she quit her other jobs and focused on webcam modeling, where she could freely express herself and earn a living. After 2 years, the demand started to decline as new girls captured all the public's attention. Melissa decided to seek something new but related to her current work, leading her to the adult film industry. She began filming movies that combined her 2 passions, cosplay and horror. She created a website and her followers quickly grew, as did her social media presence. With this advantage, she opened a Patreon account where her fans could donate to her, receiving thousands of dollars, although she still wanted to earn more. In 2016, she gathered other girls who worked in the same field and complained about not having a fixed place to make their videos. Melissa, along with her boyfriend, opened an erotic photography studio, which was a complete success. However, problems soon arose as she managed everything alone with little help from her partner. After many arguments, they decided to end their relationship. In 2017, the business went bankrupt, and Melissa's self-esteem noticeably declined. She decided to undergo cosmetic surgeries which made her feel invincible, and it was then that she downloaded Tinder, confident she would find new love. Matthew Trussler was born on January 11, 1994 in Massachusetts. From a young age, he was a fun and charismatic boy who loved spending time with his family and friends, who were the center of his life. After graduating from university, he began working as a general manager at an Italian restaurant. Despite his good economic standing in 2015, he decided it was time for a change. He was offered a job in Tampa. Motivated to see more son and his brother who lived there, he accepted the offer. The first few months passed smoothly, and Matthew eventually found a job at another company, this time in technology, which aligned more with his interests. Over the following years, he prospered professionally and continued to build friendships, always managing to bring a smile to everyone he met. However, something was missing in his life: love. Thus, in April 2017, he decided to download Tinder and met none other than Melissa Turner. The connection was almost instant. They began talking daily and soon started a relationship. As both had good economic standings, in December 2018, they bought a house. It was excessively large for 2 young people, with 2 floors, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and 2 patios with a pool. On January 11th, Matthew expressed his happiness on Facebook, posting, "A quarter of a century later, I have a mortgage, 4 furry babies, and a wonderful girl. I am a happy man." Shortly after, they got engaged and seemed truly confident in their love. They spent time with their pets and posted pictures where they looked very much in love. But behind closed doors, the situation was very different. Matthew was increasingly distant from his family. They hardly saw him, and he didn't answer their calls. His close ones began to suspect that Melissa wanted to distance him from the rest of the world to have him all to herself. As months went by, things worsened. The few times they managed to talk to Matthew, he avoided questions about his relationship, becoming excessively nervous. By then, his brother was convinced that his sister-in-law was a manipulative and jealous person, suspecting that the couple argued constantly, usually because Matthew did not follow Melissa's orders, as she wanted to control his every move. They weren't the only ones who noticed this strange dynamic. Their neighbors were concerned about the noises coming from the house, believing that Melissa had a temper problem, which was evident during a party they hosted. The couple invited all their friends and played loud music. Initially, there was no issue. It was normal for 2 young people to want to have fun. However, in the middle of the night, loud screams woke up the entire neighborhood. Looking out their windows, they saw Melissa grabbing another girl by the hair and dragging her into the house, but both were in costume, and none of the guests seemed disturbed. They thought it might be some kind of show, but they couldn't have been more wrong. After a while, they continued hearing Melissa, noticeably agitated, and the other girls screaming and pleading. From then on, the neighbors kept a close watch on the young homeowner's behavior, hearing her daily insults toward Matthew, banging on furniture or raising her voice. Finally, on September 20th, 2019, Matthew decided to end the abuse. He told Melissa he no longer wanted to be with her and even made a series of posts on his Facebook account indicating he was single. While his family couldn't get much information from him about this, they noticed he seemed relieved and hoped he would turn to them for comfort, but this never happened. Matthew ended up getting back together with Melissa one last time. The neighbors were sure they would separate again, and they were right, but not in the way they anticipated. On October 17th, 2019, the couple went shopping and had lunch at home as if everything was fine. But less than 24 hours later, something terrible happened. Melissa made a frantic and agitated 911 call, saying that the previous night she and her fiancé had consumed a large amount of alcohol and went to bed completely drunk. That morning, when she woke up, she noticed he wasn't there and searched the house, eventually finding him lying on the floor of the backyard in a pool of blood. The police rushed to the house in the Tampa suburbs. Upon arrival, they saw Matthew's body face up near the pool. The first thing Melissa did was tell them she had tried to perform CPR but was unsuccessful. The officers believed her, but something didn't add up. Matthew had cuts on his arm and chest, and Melissa had dried blood all over her body and a cut on her hand. Something wasn't adding up. After confirming the young man's death, the police escorted Melissa to the sheriff's office for additional questioning to understand what really happened. She repeated the same story to the officers that she had told over the phone, recounting that both she and her fiancé had drunk until they fell asleep, and that she found his body in the garden the next day. Meanwhile, the detectives canvassed the neighborhood for clues and noticed something intriguing. A nearby house had a surveillance camera pointed directly at the young couple's home. They quickly checked the footage from this camera, suspecting it could provide valuable evidence, and they were right. They also discovered the security cameras in the house. With this crucial discovery, they returned to the station to share their findings with the other investigators. Melissa remained very calm until they showed her the videotapes. The footage captured audio of an argument coming from the backyard of their house at 4:31 a.m. A female voice, likely Melissa's, could be heard saying, "Stay down." Just seconds later, the sound of glass breaking was audible, followed by the same voice saying, "So just die already." Over the next few minutes, the situation escalated with the woman repeating, "I hate you," and "Get up now," several times. Then came the sound of slaps and what might have been a man's voice, though it was unintelligible. Around 4:44, the female voice screamed, "No," and a minute later said something unclear, but to the investigators it sounded like, "What have I done?" The most chilling part was the videos from the house's security cameras. It showed Matthew walking very calmly while Melissa followed, hunched over and visibly angry. Although the image wasn't very clear, it was evident that it was them. What caught the officers' attention most was the visible blood on Melissa's hand, leading them to theorize that she had injured herself while stabbing her fiancé. After watching the tape, Melissa was speechless. Initially, she claimed not to remember having any argument, but as hours passed, she realized she couldn't keep lying and had to tell the real story, or at least what she claimed was the truth. She recounted that she was sleeping when Matthew woke her up in a state of drunkenness, which infuriated her. They started arguing and she reproached him for still drinking at 4 in the morning. The fight escalated and moved to the kitchen. There, Matthew threw a knife on the counter and began strangling her. Scared and thinking he was going to kill her, Melissa grabbed the knife from his hand and stabbed him in the back to escape. She also explained that after the fight, she tried to clean the house and realized they had broken some glass. While picking it up, she cut her hand, which supposedly explained her injury. The detectives found this story highly suspicious, and everything became even stranger when the autopsy results arrived. The autopsy revealed that Matthew had a defensive wound on his right forearm, a large laceration on his chest, a small cut on his right shoulder, and a significant wound on his back from a stab. The medical examiner indicated that the cause of death was an incision in the arm that perforated the cephalic vein. It was entirely impossible for him to be more injured than Melissa if he had started the fight, as she only had the cut on her hand. That same day, Melissa was arrested for second-degree murder and taken to jail, where she would await trial without bail. When Matthew's family learned what had happened, they were devastated. His brother and his fiancée quickly expressed their suspicions to the police. They said that Melissa had isolated Matthew long before killing him, recounting how she had distanced him from all his loved ones and insisting she was far from an innocent girl. They believed she had manipulated the young man who, according to them, was an excellent person. Whether this was true or a complete lie would be determined in court. The trial began on February 14th, 2022, 2 years after Matthew's death. Melissa continued to be charged with murder. Her lawyer argued that it was a case of self-defense, claiming that Melissa had suffered abuse in the relationship and only committed the crime to protect herself. The assistant district attorney did not believe this version. He was convinced that she was drunk and that the situation had gotten out of hand. He suggested that Melissa might have been frustrated with her partner's alcoholism, which led her to harm him. Melissa took the stand and, through tears, declared that she loved Matthew and never intended to harm him. She claimed that he had tried to kill her and that she was only trying to stop him. She also spoke about Matthew's drinking problems, stating that on that night, His blood alcohol level was 5 times the legal limit in Florida, a situation that had occurred on previous occasions. Sometimes he had even experienced hallucinations, staring fixedly at a corner and telling her that the devil was standing right there. Regarding Matthew's mental health, she said he had mistreated her several times and suffered from depression but refused to seek help, not wanting to tell even his family. Lastly, Melissa spoke about the day of the crime, saying she didn't know how Matthew ended up with so many injuries on his body. She only remembered stabbing him once in the back to free herself from being strangled. Melissa's mother also defended her in court, explaining that her daughter had never been a troublesome person and always tried to avoid problems by hiding her pain. Despite these statements, there were many testimonies indicating that Melissa did not appear to have acted in self-defense. One key piece of evidence was the police report, showing that the emergency call was made almost 4 hours after the stabbing occurred, which was evident from the time on Matthew's watch that tracked his heart rate. When the first responders arrived, Melissa initially claimed she had no idea what had happened to her boyfriend, only stating that she found him in the backyard. Her first mistake was lying in that statement. Matthew's mother took the stand to defend her son's memory, calling Melissa's story fabricated and expressing that her statements hurt as much as the crime itself. She addressed her former daughter-in-law directly, saying they both knew Matthew was the best thing that had ever happened to her, and that if he were there, the sentence Melissa was about to receive would have caused him great distress. However, none of these statements were as valuable as the video footage. An audio expert testified that the audio had been enhanced, making it clear that the couple argued and that Melissa verbally abused Matthew. Melissa's lawyer tried to defend her again, arguing that the audio had been manipulated. He found it suspicious that his client's voice was so loud while Matthew's was only a murmur, suggesting it had been edited to amplify the volume and make the shouts seem much worse. Nevertheless, he acknowledged that Melissa could be heard in the footage saying things like, "I hate you, get up, and die." He also admitted that there were sounds resembling slaps. The prosecution countered that the recording had not been altered and that there was no doubt Melissa would be convicted. On February 18, 2022, the much-anticipated day arrived for Matthew's family. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before reaching a decision. The judge rejected the self-defense claim, and Melissa was found guilty of second-degree murder. During the session, a juror remarked that he believed Melissa had lost her mind, noting that she knew Matthew would die after the attack, but still didn't call the police or an ambulance. On March 18th, a month after the verdict, Melissa returned to court for her sentencing. She received 20 years and 5 months in prison, which she would serve in a Florida state prison. The victim's family celebrated the decision. Matthew's sister-in-law stated that justice had been served, but only to a certain extent. Matthew's brother expressed how much he missed his brother, saying he was a good guy who was just starting to become a man. The reality is that we'll never know what would have happened if the two young people had separated. But one thing is certain: Melissa decided to kill Matthew without remorse. Just 2 days before her death, a camera captured a gaunt and hollow-eyed Sophie Leonette sitting in front of a fireplace. The young au pair had been starved and tortured by her London host family for weeks. In her final photo, she appears frail and aged, though she was only 21 years old. Shortly after this photo was taken, her employers brutally beat her to death and then attempted to dispose of her body on the family grill. Why did they destroy this once vibrant girl so completely? The answer to that question is perhaps the most bizarre part of this tragic story. Sophie Lyonnais was born on January 7, 1996, in a small rural town in eastern France, home to just over 60,000 people. Her parents, Catherine and Patrick Lyonnais, went their separate ways during her childhood. After the separation, Catherine remarried, yet both she and Patrick remained in the same town, ensuring Sophie maintained a close relationship with each of them. Known for her kindness and altruism, Sophie loved animals and children, consistently striving to help others. Her interests included outdoor activities like horse riding and ice skating. She was also passionate about music and films and engaged in creating independent documentaries focused on social issues such as climate change and animal rights. Described by friends and family as shy and introverted since her youth, her love for children inspired her to pursue a childcare course after high school. However, job opportunities in her field were scarce in her hometown. At 19, encouraged by a cousin, she considered becoming an au pair to blend cultural and linguistic exchange with childcare, while exploring the world and improving her English. In 2015, Sophie connected with Sabrina Quaider and Wissem Medouni, a French couple living in the affluent Southfield area on Wimbledon Park Road in London, who were seeking a French-speaking au pair for their 2 children. She applied, was swiftly hired, and by January 2016, just after her 20th birthday, she left her small town for London, unaware of the impending terror she would face. In London, she met her employers, Sabrina, born in 1983, and Wissem, born in 1978. The couple, of Algerian descent, met in France when Sabrina was about 18, working at a fair selling crepes. Wissem, 5 years her senior, fell for her at first sight. Though initially uninterested, Sabrina faced relentless pursuit from Wissem, who was captivated by her exotic beauty and charismatic presence. Despite her volatile and manipulative nature, they embarked on a tumultuous and toxic relationship that lasted 17 years. In 2004, at 22, Sabrina moved to London seeking a better future, initially working as an au pair with aspirations to enter the fashion industry. Wissem followed her to London. Having studied economics at the University of Paris, he quickly secured a job with the London branch of a French bank. At this point, the couple was not married. Their relationship was tumultuous, marked by frequent breakups and reconciliations, with Sabrina firmly in control. While together, Sabrina was often unfaithful, leaving Wissem for other men but always returning, and he would take her back without question. Around 2008, Sabrina had her first child, though details about the child, including the father's identity, the exact age, and the name, remain unclear. During her time in London, Sabrina worked various jobs while trying to break into the fashion and makeup industry. Her big break came in 2011 when she was involved in a pyramid sales scheme for a telecommunications company and met Mark Walton at a bank in Notting Hill. Mark, a former member of the Irish boy band Boyzone, fell deeply in love with Sabrina and they began dating. This relationship opened doors for Sabrina in the celebrity world, leading to work as a makeup artist for celebrities. She later expanded into designing and songwriting. Sabrina and Mark's relationship lasted 2 years, during which she allegedly had a second child in the United States, supposedly with Mark. Mark later described Sabrina as pathologically jealous, accusing him of infidelity with male sex workers and even installing hidden cameras to spy on him. After her time with Mark, Sabrina returned to London and resumed her relationship with Wissem, who welcomed her back with open arms. With Wissem working at the bank and Sabrina's success as a makeup artist and designer, The couple enjoyed a comfortable and even luxurious lifestyle in an affluent London neighborhood. However, beneath the surface, their relationship remained toxic. Though they were married under a traditional Muslim ceremony, Sabrina openly ridiculed their marriage, referring to Uisem as a relative or friend while continuing to date other men. Their life together was filled with loud arguments, with Sabrina never shy about expressing her dissatisfaction. Despite this, they never parted ways, perpetuating their cycle of conflict. Neighbors viewed Sabrina and Uisem as antisocial and strange. Sabrina always appeared glamorous and well-dressed, but the couple was unfriendly and inconsiderate, often leaving trash outside for days, blocking neighbors' driveways with their cars and failing to pay rent on time. Sabrina remained fixated on her ex, Mark, accusing him of bizarre and false actions such as sexually abusing a non-existent cat, using black magic against her, and hiring a helicopter to spy on her. The police received over 30 reports from Sabrina about Mark, all of which were unfounded. Her obsession escalated to the point where she received a police warning for creating a fake social media profile to harass Mark, primarily accusing him of being a child abuser. It later emerged that Sabrina suffered from depression and borderline personality disorder, causing her to experience severe mood swings, delusions, and paranoia. Although Uisem did not suffer from any psychological disorders, Sabrina managed to convince him that her accusations were true. Into this chaotic and unstable environment stepped the young and naive Sophie, in search of a dream that would soon turn into a nightmare. Initially, Sophie's experience as an au pair was pleasant and positive. The children adored her and were easy to care for. She earned €50 a week and befriended other nannies in the area. In phone calls with her mother, Sophie seemed happy and content with how things were going. She got along well with Sabrina, often chatting over tea at the kitchen table. Sabrina, who loved doing hair and makeup, even gave Sophie a makeover. However, this camaraderie and apparent tranquility did not last long. Gradually, Sabrina's violent and abusive side began to emerge. The treatment of Sophie turned abusive, starting with shouting and insults over simple mistakes like tripping, breaking a glass, or not having meals ready on time. This escalated to physical attacks, including slaps and hair pulling as punishment, always explosive and unpredictable. Sophie, being shy and passive, did not know how to react to the abuse. She had never faced such a situation before, and aggression was not in her nature. She kept silent, cried in her room, and tried to comply, but there was no way to satisfy Sabrina, who had already marked her as a victim of her violent delusions. The abuse intensified, and soon Sophie was denied food, leading to rapid weight loss. With physical weakness came mental exhaustion. On top of everything, the couple confiscated her passport and stopped paying her. Sophie found herself held against her will in a house where she was subjected to relentless torment. Despite everything, Sophie tried to seek help in her own way. On one occasion, she told the owner of a fast food restaurant that she was being beaten, but received no response. She also tried to go to the house of some family acquaintances, but Sabrina followed her and, after causing a scene, forced her to return. The owner of a fish and chips restaurant in the area recalled seeing Sophie in his establishment a couple of times, alone and visibly distressed. When he asked her what was wrong, she said that her mother was sick. Since Sophie was very shy and had limited English skills, she rarely spoke with people she didn't know well. She had written and talked to her family about possibly returning home earlier than planned, and her parents were aware of the household tensions, but they had no idea how serious the situation was. Feeling trapped with no one to turn to, Sophie was paralyzed by fear and manipulated by the couple to the point where she felt incapable of escaping. This ordeal lasted for about a year, with the abuse intensifying over time. By April 2017, approximately 15 months into her job, her mother Catherine noticed during a phone call that Sophie seemed unhappy and weary, expressing a desire to come home. On August 8th, Sophie called her family again, crying and sounding confused. She told her mother she needed £40 for a ticket. Sophie received the money and bought a return ticket for September 18th, 2017. Unfortunately, she would never get to use it. Sabrina's paranoid delusions and obsession with Mark intertwined with the abuse towards Sophie. She began to believe that Sophie and Mark were plotting against her, accusing the nanny of sleeping with him and being a child abuser. She also claimed Sophie was spying for Mark, planning to help him enter their home to drug and sexually assault her, Wissem, and the children. These accusations were baseless, but Sabrina convinced Wissem they were true. Initially, Wissem would look the other way when Sabrina yelled at or hit Sophie, but he eventually started actively participating in the abuse. Sabrina told Sophie she could only leave if she admitted to working for Mark, but Sophie refused to acknowledge this. In an attempt to extract a confession, they subjected her to hours of inhumane treatment and interrogation. They dunked her in the bathtub, beat her with cables, and threatened her with sexual assault. These sessions were recorded on their cell phones, resulting in 8 hours of footage. The brutal duo finally broke Sophie, who confessed to an affair with Mark, a man she had never met and who had been living in Los Angeles since 2015. Sophie believed that telling Sabrina what she wanted to hear would secure her release, but it did not. In fact, her nightmare intensified. On September 19, 2017, after nearly 2 years of working for the couple, 21-year-old Sophie was savagely beaten in the bathroom, resulting in her death. The following afternoon, on Wednesday the 20th, Wissem lit a bonfire to burn Sophie's body, adding chicken and meat to mask the smell. However, neighbors called the British emergency number due to the thick smoke and strong odor emanating from the garden. Authorities arrived at the residence around 6:20 p.m. By then, the bonfire had been burning for approximately 3 hours. One of the first firefighters on the scene quickly sensed something was amiss. As he extinguished the flames, he noticed what appeared to be human remains, including what looked like a nose, along with some clothes and jewelry. When he questioned Wissem about the fire, the man claimed he was burning a sheep carcass he had bought, explaining that the remains were from the animal. The firefighter observed that Wissem seemed uncomfortable and resigned when responding. Police officers at the scene recovered the charred remains in a pair of melted glasses. Just 2 days later, Sabrina and Wissem were arrested on suspicion of murder. On September 26th, they appeared before the criminal court. At this time, Sophie's remains had not been officially identified, although the press had already reported her as the victim of the horrific crime. Sabrina cried throughout the hearing and interrupted to declare her innocence. Although both admitted to attempting to dispose of the body, neither took responsibility for Sophie's death and blamed each other. In his initial statement, Wissem claimed Sophie died accidentally during an interrogation in the bathroom. However, he later recanted, saying he made that statement to protect Sabrina. His revised account stated that Sabrina woke him, saying Sophie was not breathing, and he found her lifeless in the bathroom. Sabrina's defense acknowledged she had hit Sophie on several occasions, but maintained that the girl died in her sleep. After hearing both sides, the judge set the trial date for March 19, 2018. Sabrina and Wissem were remanded to prison while the police continued their investigation. no bail was requested. According to the pathologist involved in the investigation, the body was so severely burned that determining the victim's sex and age was initially impossible. On October 3rd, 2 weeks after the incident, DNA tests confirmed the remains were those of Sophie. The autopsy revealed that at the time of her death, she had a broken jaw, a fractured sternum, and 5 broken ribs, injuries sustained within the last 36 hours of her life. Due to the extensive burns, the exact cause of death could not be determined. However, it was established that she might have died from a head injury, neck constriction, or drowning. The trial began on March 19, 2018. Sophie's parents traveled to London with financial support from the French government to attend the hearings in person. The prosecutor Richard Horwell argued before the jury that the couple had killed Sophie out of vengeance, aiming to punish a man the young Frenchwoman had never met. He described Sabrina's accusations against Sophie as pure, delusional fantasy and characterized Wissem as a weak, submissive, and docile man. Another prosecutor added that while only Sabrina and Wissem knew exactly how they killed Sophie, it was proven that she died as a result of sustained violence, not an accident. The forensic psychologist testified that Sophie had been horrifically interrogated for at least 12 days, as evidenced by videos found on the couple's cell phones. She also stated that Sabrina admitted to having sex near the body of her victim, claiming Wissem forced her, which demonstrated severe dissociation and a lack of remorse. The jury was shown several videos of the interrogations. In one, dated September 11th, 9 days before the crime, Sabrina could be heard yelling at the victim, accusing her of destroying everything. She also prayed aloud, asking God not to make her touch Sophie, saying she didn't want to dirty her hands. Another recording from September 18th, 2017, shortly before Sophie's death, showed her making a confession. The footage revealed her emaciated and broken state, and the prosecution argued that this confession was not given voluntarily. Richard Horwell described the actions of the accused as a campaign of intimidation, martyrdom, and violence that completely destroyed young Sophie. He stated that the couple's plan was to dispose of the body, claim the nanny had returned to France, and deny any involvement in her disappearance. Sabrina was identified as the mastermind behind the plot due to her obsessive fixation on Mark. Wissem, initially a follower, became a willing accomplice in the crime. Mark, contacted by the London police on September 21st, flew from Los Angeles to testify against Sabrina. During his testimony, he explained that he and Sabrina had been in a relationship for 2 years. He acknowledged having been deeply in love, but described Sabrina as extremely volatile and unpredictable. Mark detailed how she would go into fits of rage, causing scenes regardless of where they were. During the hearings, it was revealed that Sabrina had employed nannies before, but she always fired them, suspecting them of theft and flirting with him. The musician also confirmed that the first time he heard of Sophie was when the London police contacted him after the crime. Regarding the defense, Sabrina's lawyers leveraged Wissem's initial statement to attack him and defend Sabrina. She reminded the court that Wissem had claimed he hit Sophie in the face, causing her head to strike the tiles, rendering her unconscious and slipping under the water. Sabrina's lawyer added that when Wissem realized Sophie was unresponsive, he dragged her out and tried to revive her, but failed. During the sentencing hearing, a letter of apology from Sabrina to Sophie and her family was read. In the letter, Sabrina expressed that she and Sophie had shared many good times and sorrows together until things went tragically wrong. She stated that she thought about Sophie every day and was saddened and shocked by her absence from the world. Sabrina described the situation as a horrible nightmare from which she wished to awaken, living each day with sadness and regret over that dreadful night. She also mentioned living without hope and being deeply disappointed in herself, concluding with a wish for Sophie to rest in peace with God. In an attempt to gain leniency for his client, Sabrina's lawyer argued that her actions were driven by her delusions and personality disorders, which left her with an irrational and overwhelming fear that Sophie was conspiring against her and her family with Mark. While the judge acknowledged that the couple suffered from a shared psychosis and that Sabrina, in particular, had severe delusions and was the driving force, this did not excuse the atrocious treatment and violent death of Sophie. The prosecution successfully convinced the jury of Sabrina and Uwisem's guilt. On May 24, 2018, after a 2-month trial and 6 days of deliberation, the couple was found guilty of the murder of Sophie Leonek. Sabrina and Uwisem were sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. Announcing his decision, the judge stated that both had subjected Sophie to unbearable suffering, making her believe she would drown unless she gave them the information they sought. The judge emphasized that Sabrina's motive was to make Sophie and Mark suffer without any justification. He was convinced that the accused knew their method of interrogation was unacceptable, that it was illegal to assault her, and that Sophie was in a deplorable state at the time of her death. Upon hearing the verdict, Sabrina broke down in tears while Uwisem sat motionless, staring at his lap. Sophie's parents also addressed the murderers. Catherine stated that no God would forgive them for what they had done, and Patrick declared that they had not only taken his daughter's life, but had also stolen his own. On June 2nd, 2018, nearly 9 months after her death, Sophie's body was repatriated to her homeland. Her remains were brought to a funeral chapel for a private gathering of her family before the service. A few days later, on June 6th, her funeral was held at the Saint Denis Cathedral, attended by over 150 people. Patrick, her father, said that Sophie was very loving, fond of children and animals. He was heartbroken to know that she suffered abuse until the end of her life. Her aunt described her as a sweet and gentle girl who loved everyone and cherished making people happy. Approximately 16 days after the verdict against those responsible for Sophie's death, Uwisem's defense appealed, citing a supposed note from the jury members to the judge during their deliberations. According to the lawyer, the note expressed uncertainty about Uwisem's intentions during the events leading to Sophie's death between September 18th and 21, 2017. They also argued that the minimum sentence was too long. Sabrina's lawyer made a similar appeal. However, both appeals were rejected in January 2019. Allie Kostiel was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but she always dreamed of attending the University of Mississippi. When she finally got this opportunity, she felt like her life had reached its peak. However, things took a dark turn. Investigators noted that no clues or evidence could have alerted Allie's friends before her life was tragically cut short on that fateful July afternoon. Detectives arriving at the crime scene were baffled by how someone could commit such an act against a well-behaved, easygoing student. Their attention quickly turned to their prime suspect, another student with a hidden agenda that no one could have anticipated. Alexandria Kostiel was born on September 11, 1997, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her long name was quickly shortened to the affectionate nickname Allie, which is what her loved ones always called her. Allie was the daughter of Cindy and Keith Kostiel, and she had a younger brother named Andrew. From an early age, Allie showed a strong sense of responsibility towards her studies, coupled with her athletic talents. These attributes helped her excel as a standout student at high school. In addition to her academic success, Allie was an active cheerleader, part of the track and field team, the golf team, and a member of the National Honor Society. Her adventurous spirit also led her to volunteer in Peru and Africa, where she taught English to young children. Cindy and Keith were extremely proud of their daughter, as Allie's affection and light touched everyone around her. She loved animals and children, often working as a babysitter to earn some money, and her caring nature made her a favorite among families. Allie also enjoyed dog walking and was an enthusiast of yoga and half-marathon running. Her spiritual nature and constant smile made her approachable to everyone. During this period of her life, she formed a deep bond with Maddie Norris. The two became inseparable, sharing dreams and secrets in a way that felt like they had known each other in previous lives. Their friendship was more like a sisterhood, leading to many shared adventures. After graduating in 2016, Allie enrolled at the University of Mississippi to study business administration. She was thrilled to be part of an institution rich in tradition, history, and football. Her parents witnessed the excitement and joy this new chapter brought to her life. Allie also dreamed of meeting a charming Southern boy with whom she could one day start a family. Despite the distance, her friendship with Maddie remained as strong as ever. It was no surprise to her loved ones that Allie thrived not only academically but also socially. She quickly made new, meaningful friendships, including one with Elizabeth, whom she met at a campus party. They shared several common interests, which solidified their close bond. Among the new people in her life, one stood out as particularly special to Allie, driven by her innocent romantic aspirations. She set her sights on Brandon Thiesfeld, a young man just a year older than her from Fort Worth, Texas. Brandon was the son of Daniel Thiesfeld, a medical professional. Brandon enjoyed an idyllic childhood filled with love and all the comforts any child could wish for. Raised in a good Christian family, he had ample opportunities for outdoor activities like hunting and fishing in the vast Texan landscape. As he grew older, he also shone as a football player at his school. Like Allie, Brandon was a student at the University of Mississippi's business school. They shared mutual acquaintances and even attended some classes together. However, Brandon's temperament was quite different from Allie's. But as the saying goes, opposites attract. According to local records, Brandon was arrested in April 2017 for public intoxication and possessing a fake ID. This wasn't his only brush with the law. He was involved in another incident, though the Oxford Police Department later confirmed that the records of this case were expunged and sealed. Despite these isolated incidents and the generally good conduct Brandon displayed, there was someone who did not find him particularly likable and had reasons for such a perception. Rex Ravita, another student who lived in a dormitory across the hall from Brandon during their freshman year, frequently encountered him. Rex found Brandon's behavior objectionable, considering him a spoiled daddy's boy. According to Rex, Brandon often boasted about his father's wealth and how it could get him out of any trouble, which Rex found particularly annoying. Additionally, Rex had noticed another particularly unpleasant trait in Brandon. He often treated women in a degrading manner. One night when Allie and Brandon crossed paths at a local bar, she felt an immediate attraction. It didn't take long for them to start dating occasionally, though Allie wished they spent more time together. She often brought him along as her date to most of her parties. However, to almost everyone observing their developing relationship, it was clear that Brandon wasn't as enamored with Allie as she was with him. Despite this, Allie seemed blinded by her initial impression and Brandon's good looks, never seeing through the facade. The evident disinterest from Brandon and his flaws, which were apparent to everyone else, went unnoticed by Allie. She was convinced she had found her dream man and envisioned a future with a home and family. As weeks and months passed, their relationship grew complicated. Around their second year in college, driven by her intense feelings, Allie sent Brandon numerous late-night texts while she was out partying, eager to chat with him. Without any explanation, he blocked her number. During this time, Maddie visited Oxford to see her friend and unofficial sister. Naturally, she was excited to meet the new man in Allie's life, but to her surprise, Brandon didn't show up. During that visit, Maddie became concerned about Brandon's clear detachment, despite the affection Allie lavished on him. Despite this, Allie seemed to be doing well in many other areas of her life. By her third year, she had formed a strong friendship with another university student named Morgan. It was around this time that Brandon inexplicably reappeared as if nothing had happened, seeking to reconnect with Allie. Allie interpreted this gesture as a sign of mutual romantic interest and became filled with hope. However, she was the only one who saw it that way. To everyone else, it was strange, knowing that Brandon had no genuine feelings for her. One of the most astonished by the situation was Rex. Upon learning about the supposed romance between Allie and Brandon, he believed that the young Texan was emotionally manipulating her, making her think he loved her, something Rex was sure was false. Deep down, Allie might have been aware of Brandon's lack of affection. This could explain why her closest friends and even her parents knew very little about him. References to Brandon and their relationship were quite vague. Consequently, none of Allie's close ones were aware of the emotional abuse she was experiencing. Allie often found herself in tears over the man she loved. Her roommate at the time occasionally noticed the sadness in Allie's eyes. However, as she mentioned in a later interview, Allie was a girl who radiated pure light and had the ability to appear happy even when she was sad. According to her, Allie's kindness blinded her to others' malice, making her see people as better than they actually were. In April 2019, Allie told Brandon that she was worried she might be pregnant and sent him a picture of a home pregnancy test. The results were inconclusive, but given the gravity of the situation, Allie expressed her desire to discuss it in person. Brandon's immediate response was like a cold shower. He bluntly stated he had no intention of staying with her if she was indeed pregnant. Over the next 3 months, Allie tried to meet with him to talk about it, but Brandon avoided her at all costs. Sometimes he would agree to meet and then cancel at the last minute. Other times, he simply wouldn't show up and offered no explanation afterward. Amid this emotional roller coaster, Allie continued with her life, hoping the situation would improve, and only communicated with Brandon electronically. Unbeknownst to her, Brandon was spending long hours trying to find a solution to what he saw as a major problem. He spent days researching online about medications and clinics for terminating a pregnancy. Unsatisfied with these options, he even considered more extreme scenarios, looking up how to use a weapon and hide a crime. In the midst of the uncertainty about their relationship status, the vacation period arrived. Allie decided not to travel back home to Missouri. Given that she was in her final year and had high academic ambitions, she chose to stay at the university in July to attend a summer course. Additionally, she was teaching fitness classes at the time, which motivated her to sacrifice her break to earn extra money for her expenses. However, Cindy and Keith were not willing to miss the opportunity to be with their daughter. They informed her that they would come to visit. Allie was overjoyed at the news. Once her parents arrived at her apartment, the three of them had the most wonderful days together. Allie and her mother went shopping and chatted endlessly about countless things. There was so much to catch up on that the hours seemed too short. Knowing Allie's love for the sea and the beach, Cindy gifted her several new items, all with a marine theme, to reflect her interest in her home. Allie, in turn, repeatedly asked her mother to cook her favorite dishes. When it was time to say goodbye in mid-July 2019, Allie wished her parents could stay for at least one more day. As Cindy and Keith headed back home, they comforted themselves with the thought that their next reunion was just around the corner and they just needed to be patient. Shortly after, Brandon contacted Allie via text message. Just as he had done previously, disappearing and reappearing months later as if nothing had happened, this time he requested a meeting to discuss the delicate matter in person. On Friday, July 19, 2019, back in St. Louis, Cindy called her daughter to confirm everything was all right. True to her word, Allie went to a bar that night. A while later, surveillance cameras captured her leaving the place, wearing a white shirt and blue shorts, with her head down, seemingly texting. The footage shows her in front of the door, though she doesn't enter the establishment. Afterward, Allie returned home but left again without her roommates hearing. Around midnight, she finally met up with Brandon. The details of what transpired next have been elusive to the authorities. No one knows what was said or the tone of their conversation. It's assumed there were accusations and clarifications, but this remains speculative. What is certain is that Allie and Brandon met face-to-face at a lake, a vast area surrounded by numerous campsites and recreational spaces. Due to its size and characteristics, the Sheriff's Department has long patrolled its various nooks and crannies. During the early hours of Saturday, July 20th, 2019, the moonlight was the only illumination for the patrolling officers. The prevailing darkness was far from romantic. According to police sources, a local resident walking their dog reported hearing gunshots in the early hours of that morning, between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. The attacker fled the scene. Around 10:30 a.m., a police investigator was on patrol, not expecting to discover the lifeless body of a young woman. The discovery occurred near an abandoned fishing camp, a remote location about 20 miles from the university. Overcoming the initial shock, the police officer was able to gather some general information about the victim. This experience marked a significant turning point in his career. Allie's purse, containing her school ID and driver's license, was found nearby shortly afterward. When the police department was notified, investigators began their efforts to uncover what had happened. They attempted to trace Allie's cell phone but were unsuccessful. Meanwhile, that Saturday, Brandon spent the day with friends, behaving as if it were any other day, showing no apparent signs of distress. They went bowling and chatted normally, with none of his friends noticing anything unusual. At some point between Saturday and Sunday, Brandon wrote a letter to his parents, revealing his anguish over his actions. Though he avoided explicitly mentioning the crime, he confessed to something terrible that would likely result in his imprisonment or death. He was certain that sooner or later the police would catch him. As investigators delved into Allie's social circle, Brandon emerged as a potential suspect. The team focused their efforts on trying to contact him, but all calls to his cell phone went unanswered. On Saturday afternoon, the police visited Allie's family to deliver the devastating news. The words hung in the air, creating a surreal sense that they were living a nightmare. Overwhelmed with grief, Cindy and Keith had to face an unimaginable reality. Allie's close friend Maddie struggled to make sense of what had happened. Her mind flooded with memories of the time spent with the friend she considered a sister. Meanwhile, the police continued their attempts to reach Brandon. By then, he had left his friend's house and was driving his truck. Allie's cell phone remained missing. The news of the crime shocked the university community and local residents. However, due to the ongoing investigation, the police withheld further details. As a result, it was unclear whether the attacker had killed Allie at the lake or abandoned her there afterward. The same confusion surrounded the murder weapon and the connection between the victim and the perpetrator. This changed when investigators made a crucial discovery. In Allie's room, they found her smartwatch, which turned out to be an invaluable piece of evidence. The smartwatch allowed them to uncover some of the text messages exchanged between Allie and Brandon. Realizing the urgency, the team immediately tried to contact Brandon, who this time answered their call. He apologized for not responding earlier and made excuses to avoid meeting with the officers, but promised to come to the police department first thing on Monday, July 22nd. After hanging up, fully aware of his predicament, Brandon continued to travel as far as possible. On Sunday, July 21st, 2019, he arrived at another friend's house carrying an unusual item, a firearm. He made no effort to hide it and even unloaded it in front of his host. Brandon also brought a six-pack of beer, so they sat down to drink, chat, and watch television. The next morning, he left without attending the scheduled meeting at the police department, thus becoming a fugitive. Detectives obtained an arrest warrant and began tracking Brandon's phone. Having left Mississippi, Brandon's location was soon identified as Memphis, Tennessee. Authorities issued an alert for his truck, which had a distinctive license plate. It didn't take long for the Memphis Fugitive Task Force to get a positive result. About an hour and a half later, the prime suspect, wearing a blood-stained shirt, was apprehended outside a gas station in the southwest part of the state. The operation involved at least 12 officers and 7 police patrols. Inside the vehicle, they found a firearm matching the one used in Allie's murder. Mississippi investigators were promptly notified. They headed north to pick up Brandon. Upon arrival, he found Brandon calm. He read him his rights and then transported the suspect back to Mississippi in custody. Once they reached the station, Brandon recounted his activities during the weekend of the crime, revealing that he had been roaming around Oxford from Friday to Saturday. Beyond that information, Brandon remained steadfast in his right to remain silent, refusing to provide further details to the investigators. He was detained at the county jail, and his family soon hired an attorney to handle his defense. In a statement, Brandon's father insisted that his son was not involved in the incident. He urged everyone to presume Brandon's innocence, confident that the ongoing investigation would reveal what he believed to be the truth. However, he was unprepared for what was to come. The first blow came when a university spokesperson confirmed that Brandon was suspended from the institution. Meanwhile, Allie's autopsy revealed that she was not pregnant at the time of her death, but this information was not shared with the media. Allie's funeral took place on Saturday, July 27, 2019. Friends, family, and community members left flowers and condolence notes. Despite their indescribable grief, they felt fortunate to have known such a vibrant and luminous young woman. In August of that year, Brandon was charged with first-degree murder. If found guilty, he could face the death penalty. His name made headlines. When Rex heard the news, he was initially shocked, but soon, everything seemed to make sense. He recalled all the rude and contemptuous comments Brandon had made about various women. For the prosecutors, the case became a textbook example of ignored warning signs in relationships that can lead to tragic endings. They believed that Allie's death could have been prevented. As the search for evidence continued, investigators discovered the letter Brandon had written during that weekend while searching his apartment. The COVID-19 pandemic delayed the start of the judicial process, requiring extra patience from Allie's friends and family. However, the investigators used this time to continue their work, sifting through hundreds of text messages between Allie and Brandon, a daunting task. Meanwhile, the prosecutors continued to build their case, gradually uncovering the details of an unequal love story. A series of facts, previously unknown to those close to the university student, came to light. When the case was finally presented to a grand jury in mid-2021, the evidence included photographs of the gun and bullet casings, as well as the letter. To the prosecutors, this letter was clearly a confession. However, the defense presented a completely different perspective. As Brandon pleaded not guilty, his lawyer argued that the letter was merely a farewell note, as Brandon had contemplated taking his own life at that time. To support this claim, the defense mentioned that Brandon himself had stated he was holding the gun to his head when he suddenly fainted. It was during this moment that the courtroom learned from Allie's autopsy report that she was not pregnant and had no evidence of ever having been pregnant. The revelation caused an unmistakable shock. The trial proceeded until, unexpectedly, in August 2021, just a week before the sentencing, Brandon chose to admit his responsibility for the crime. He and his legal team reached a plea agreement with the prosecution to avoid the death penalty. Instead, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, Brandon addressed Allie's family, apologizing for the immense pain he caused by taking their daughter's life. He acknowledged that his actions had permanently altered the lives of the Kostiel family and his own. He expressed a desire to turn back time and undo his actions, but knowing that was impossible, he sought forgiveness from God and hoped that one day they might find it in their hearts to forgive him. Following Brandon's statement, the victim impact statement was read aloud in court, delivered by Cindy, Allie's mother. In her letter, she expressed regret for not being able to keep her daughter away from Brandon, whom she described in stark terms as a monstrous, heartless, scheming, ungrateful, sinister, violent, and corrupt individual. Cindy also added that Brandon had every opportunity to do good in the world, but chose to do evil. Because of that choice, he would spend every day of the rest of his life in prison. She reminded everyone that it was an atrocious act he committed against a sweet soul like Allie, and predicted that every time the cell door slammed shut, it would be a reminder of what he did and the life he took. Those who knew Allie hold on to the certainty that the actions of her attacker will never extinguish the sweet light she brought into the world. On the contrary, they know that her spirit will live on through the lives she touched, as Allie always strived to make the world a better place with every step she took. On a quiet October afternoon in 2005, a tragic accident shattered the lives of everyone involved. 14-month-old Kyle Lazarkick was found unresponsive in his home, his tiny body marked with mysterious injuries. The young nanny, Ada Quadros, frantically dialed 911, but what happened next would change her life forever. As paramedics raced to the scene, the grim reality of Kyle's condition became evident. Despite Ada's desperate attempts to save him, the baby's injuries were severe. But what could have caused such a tragedy? The answers seemed elusive. Ada Quadros was born on September 13, 1977, in the coastal town of Chimbote, Peru. She was the first child of Victor Quadros, a veterinarian, and Luz Fernandez, a teacher. Ada was the eldest of 4 siblings and consistently excelled academically, even winning knowledge contests. She had a happy childhood filled with dreams of self-improvement. Ada later recounted that she spent much of her childhood with one of her sisters on their grandparents' farm, enjoying the close connection with nature and animals. This period was one of the happiest times of her life. Although Ada's family wasn't poor, they were not wealthy either. During her teenage years, she looked for ways to contribute financially. Together with her sister and a friend, she formed a group to entertain at children's parties. After high school, Ada enrolled in a private university to study law. Unfortunately, her financial situation did not allow her to continue, and she had to drop out. Despite this setback, Ada was determined to succeed and support her family. With this goal in mind, she applied for a U.S. visa through the lottery program. Like many young people from Peru and other Latin American countries, Ada saw the United States as a land of opportunities. She was determined to move there, work hard, earn a better income, and pave the way for a brighter future for herself and her family. Her family was thrilled for her. They sold some belongings and did everything possible to gather enough money for her journey. Her destination was Texas, where she initially planned to stay with some relatives. In early 2004, she began working as a waitress in a restaurant. After some time, she joined a company that placed nannies in households. This is how she met the Lazarkick family. The Lazarkick family consisted of Father Michael, commonly known as Mike, Mother Renee, their eldest daughter Alyssa, and twin boys Ryan and Kyle. Little is known about the family's background except that they married in 2000. Shortly after their wedding, Renee became pregnant with their first daughter, Alyssa. Just 4 months after Alyssa's birth, Renee was expecting again, this time with twins Kyle and Ryan. The Lazarkick couple wanted to hire a trustworthy nanny to take care of the twins when Renee returned to work. Alyssa was already comfortable in a daycare she attended daily, where she had made several friends, so they decided she would continue going there. The couple interviewed several candidates, and Ada stood out as the best option. At 27 years old, she was young but not a teenager. She appeared healthy, strong, well-mannered, and cheerful. Renee wanted Ada to start immediately so she could spend a few weeks with her, explaining the household routines, where things were, and what was expected of her. She also wanted to observe how Ada handled the young twins, who were just over a year old. The family had one specific request. They needed assurance that Ada could commit to staying with them for 18 months, and Ada committed to this arrangement. Initially, it was agreed that she would only spend the day at the Lazarkick household, but after some time, they asked her to live in, and Ada agreed. From then on, she only left on weekends to stay at her uncle's house. Everything seemed to go smoothly. The Lazarkick family was pleased with Ada's work and grew fond of her, trusting her completely. Numerous photos captured happy moments with the smiling young nanny holding the twins. However, everything changed in the summer of 2005. Ada informed the Lazarkick family that her uncles were returning to Peru before moving on to Germany. Ada was prepared to go with them and had already purchased her plane ticket for October 29th of that year. Understandably, this was disappointing news for the couple since it was not what they had agreed upon. Eventually, they understood and only asked Ada to stay until they could find a replacement. They even requested her help in searching for and selecting her successor. Ada agreed, but from that point on, she no longer stayed overnight at the Lazarkick home. Instead, she returned to her uncle's house each night and came back early in the morning. Given the change in circumstances and Ada's impending departure, the Lazarkick family scheduled interviews with several nanny candidates for Wednesday, October 12th. During the day, Renee called Ada and asked her to prepare macaroni and cheese for the children. Ada complied and fed the kids. When Renee returned home, she greeted her children, saw they were well, and after interviewing the candidates, spent over an hour with her little ones before they went to bed. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, at 5 a.m. on Thursday, October 13th, Kyle woke up crying, which was unusual. The twins were typically heavy sleepers and never woke up on their own. It always took someone to wake them. Nonetheless, Renee got up, went to the twins' room, picked up Kyle, and soothed him until he fell back asleep. She then returned to bed. 2 hours later, at 7:30, Mike went to the children's room, woke them up, hugged and kissed them, and left them in Ada's care before heading to work. Renee woke up just before 9:30 and spent some time with the twins. She changed Ryan's diaper, said goodbye to both him and Kyle, and left for work. The children were fine, with nothing out of the ordinary except Kyle's early wake-up. That day, their older sister Alyssa went to daycare as usual. But things took a dramatic turn around 1 p.m. when Ada called 911, highly agitated, saying that one of the children, Kyle, had stopped breathing and was turning blue. After providing the address, the operator gave Ada instructions to perform CPR on the child. Ada followed the instructions while paramedics were on their way. A few minutes later, they arrived at the house and took over Kyle's care. They asked Ada what had happened, and she, very distressed, explained that after lunch, she had put Kyle in his crib and returned to get his brother. But when she got back with Ryan, Kyle started vomiting and stopped breathing. While paramedics attended to Kyle, Ada called Renee to inform her of the situation, giving her a different version of events. She said that after feeding the children, she took Kyle out of his high chair and, as usual, placed him on the playroom floor while she fetched his brother. But when she returned, Kyle was vomiting. She went to the kitchen to get a bowl to catch the vomit, and when she returned, Kyle had fallen. She said she picked him up, took him to the sink, and performed the maneuver Renee had taught her in case one of the children stopped breathing. But it didn't work, and she also attempted CPR. After initial treatment, the paramedics transported Kyle to the nearest hospital. When Renee arrived at the house, the ambulance with her son had already left, but the police were still at the scene. Renee took Ryan, the other twin, and asked Ada to accompany them. They followed the police, who escorted them to the hospital. During the drive, Renee called her husband and they met at the medical center. A few minutes later, the doctors decided to transfer Kyle by helicopter to the Dallas Children's Hospital. The Lazarkicks returned home, left Ada to care for Ryan, and headed to the Dallas Children's Hospital. Ada asked them to keep her informed about Kyle's condition. On the way to the hospital, Renee started worrying that Ada might be too nervous to look after Ryan properly, so she called a friend to assist the nanny at the house. Shortly after, her friend arrived at the house. Ada, visibly distressed and crying, opened the door for her. She asked Ada to explain what had happened. According to her account, Ada said that Kyle was standing between the playroom and the kitchen when he suddenly collapsed. Ada claimed she dropped a plate she was holding, picked Kyle up, took him to the living room, and performed CPR on him. She recalled Ada mentioning that Kyle's brain hadn't fully developed and that this issue had started at birth. She didn't fully understand, but Ada kept talking, saying she loved Kyle and would never hurt him. She tried to calm the very upset nanny, reassuring her that she hadn't done anything wrong and that she was a good person. Meanwhile, at the Dallas Children's Hospital, the Lazarkick family received devastating news. The doctor in charge of Kyle reported that the child had suffered severe head injuries, with multiple bruises on his head, arm, and left shoulder. A neurosurgeon met with the distressed parents to explain that something had to be done to relieve the pressure on Kyle's brain, though survival was unlikely. A child abuse specialist who also met with Mike and Renee suggested that Kyle's injuries could be consistent with abuse. The specialist stated that Kyle's injuries were so severe, it was as if he had been in a car accident or fallen from a 6th floor. Initially, Renee couldn't believe it. She thought Ada might have accidentally dropped the child or was too scared or ashamed to admit it. But the doctors clearly explained the extent of Kyle's head injuries and the force required to cause them. With this information, the possibility of an accident seemed implausible. Renee immediately called another friend to pick up Ryan and take him away from the house. While this was happening at the hospital, Ada became increasingly anxious at home. Renee's friend had to leave to pick up her son from school and take him home. During her absence, Ada called her several times, asking if there was any news about Kyle. When Renee's friend returned to the house, she found Ada calm. Ada was no longer crying or talking. Shortly after, a police car drove by the house. Upon seeing it, Ada lost her composure. She began crying uncontrollably and shouting, "No, no, no." She collapsed to the floor behind a door, repeatedly insisting she would never harm Kyle. Two female detectives arrived to interview Ada as the person who had called 911 about the injured child. She had been the only adult present when the incident occurred. As the detectives located the house and got out of their patrol car, they heard Ada's cries. Upon entering, they found her extremely agitated. When Ada was able to speak, she explained that she had taken Kyle out of his high chair and placed him on the playroom floor. She was patting his back to help him burp when he suddenly began to vomit. Ada said she went to the kitchen to get a container to catch the vomit, as Renee disliked stains on the floor. While she was cleaning, Kyle turned blue, fell, and started convulsing. She claimed she took him to the living room, called 911, and followed the dispatcher's instructions. During the interview, the other officer called the hospital to get an update on Kyle's condition. When they discovered the diagnosis, detectives told Ada that her story did not account for the injuries Kyle had. Ada suggested that Kyle might have hit his head when he fell after she left him alone in the playroom. But the officers noted that the playroom floor was covered with soft rugs, making this explanation unlikely. Trying to offer another explanation, Ada said that Kyle might have hit his head on the door frame when she carried him on her hip. At the officer's insistence, Ada demonstrated how Kyle could have been hurt and mentioned that Mike and Renee often bumped Kyle's head without any problems. The officer checked the spot where Ada claimed Kyle hit his head but found no evidence of a strong impact. When the officers told her that the injury didn't seem severe enough to cause the extensive damage the doctors described, Ada insisted that the impact was strong because she was running with Kyle in her arms. She also stated that she had never shaken or hit either of the twins. The officers urged Ada to tell the truth, as it could save Kyle's life, but Ada provided no further explanation. Given the circumstances, the officers reported the situation to their command and took Ada into preventive custody for further questioning. Meanwhile, crime scene investigation units arrived to examine the house. After completing their task, they informed Renee's friend, who had stayed at the house on behalf of the owners, that they could clean up and organize everything for the family's return. While several friends cleaned the house, they found a piece of adhesive tape sticking out from the door of a cabinet under the kitchen island. When they opened the door, they noticed it was broken and held together by tape. As a result, opening it caused the door to become misaligned. They simply placed it back and secured it with the tape, but found it strange because Renee was always careful with broken items to prevent the children from getting hurt. They had a hunch and called the police to report the door. Shortly after, investigators returned to collect potential evidence. Later, when questioned about the cabinet door, Renee stated that she frequently used that door and had never seen it held with adhesive tape. By Friday, October 14th, all of Mike and Renee's hopes had vanished. The doctors informed them that Kyle was brain dead and had no chance of recovery. Amid indescribable pain, the couple authorized the removal of life support after which Kyle passed away. 3 days later, on October 17th, the detectives interviewed Ada in prison, where she was accused of premeditated assault on a minor. This time, Ada claimed that the day before the incident, she was preparing the macaroni and cheese that Renee had requested. She had Kyle sitting on the kitchen counter, and the child fell, landing headfirst on the kitchen floor and hitting his head hard. Ada said she picked him up and checked for injuries. The only thing she noticed was redness on his ear and the right side of his head, so she applied cold compresses and gave him a pain reliever. When the interrogators asked why she hadn't told this to the other officers, Ada said she thought they wouldn't believe her. She mentioned that she didn't tell Renee because when she arrived home from work, she complained of a severe headache. Ada said Renee suffered from migraines and had requested that the lights be turned off and the house be kept quiet. The interrogators asked if she had fallen with the child, which she adamantly denied. During that interrogation, Ada learned that Kyle had died, and she cried for the rest of the interview. Ada was brought before the courts, where a judge charged her with aggravated homicide and set bail at $750,000, which was beyond the means of Ada or her family, so she remained in custody until the trial. At that time, the police indicated that she might be charged with premeditated actions, which could carry the death penalty. The case of Kyle's death went to trial in the second half of 2005. The doctor who examined Kyle at Dallas Children's Hospital testified that when he received Kyle, the child was already unconscious. He described multiple hematomas on the right side of Kyle's head, as well as bruises on the left side of his head and shoulder and both arms. Additionally, there were 2 small hemorrhages forming hematomas on the right temple. Kyle had 3 main areas of hematomas on his head, indicating 3 separate impacts. He added that the bruises were relatively recent, one possibly 12 to 16 hours old. Internally, Kyle had brain and retinal bleeding, indicative of severe trauma, even though there were no broken bones. The brain tissue was notably swollen, and the pressure inside Kyle's head was 90 millimeters of mercury, whereas the normal level is 20 millimeters. Based on these findings, he concluded that Kyle had suffered severe traumatic events consistent with blunt force trauma, possibly from someone hitting his head against a hard object. He suggested the type of injuries could result from shaking and swinging a young child's head against a solid object, like a kitchen cabinet door. A Dallas County forensic expert testified that the autopsy revealed multiple, overlapping small hematomas on Kyle's scalp, along with a couple of punctate abrasions on the right temple, separated by over a centimeter. There were also 4 or 5 pairs of similar lesions on his head. His brain showed significant hemorrhage and swelling, with retinal hemorrhages in both eyes, requiring substantial force to cause such injuries. She concluded that the cause of death was severe head injuries from blunt force trauma, agreeing that Kyle's head might have been struck multiple times against the wooden door of the kitchen cabinet. She ruled out the possibility that Kyle had merely bumped into a door frame or fallen from the kitchen counter. Another critical testimony came from a forensic analyst who measured the distance between the fasteners on the broken kitchen cabinet door and found it matched the punctate abrasions on Kyle's head. This expert also analyzed the adhesive tape used to repair the cabinet door and discovered 2 DNA traces, one of which had a much higher contribution and matched Ada's DNA. The lesser trace could not be identified. After hearing from the experts, it was Mike's turn to testify. He stated that Kyle was fine on the night of October 12th and the morning of October 13th with no bruises. He also mentioned that he prepared breakfast that morning, opening and closing the kitchen cabinet doors to get utensils and food, and that all doors were in perfect condition, including the one later found inexplicably repaired with tape. The parents shared that they had breakfast with the children and played with blocks, with the twins crawling around a playhouse. Based on all the evidence, it was easy to conclude that the events leading to Kyle's death occurred when no other adults were in the house except Ada. The case prosecutor stated that the exact circumstances of what happened to Kyle might never be known for sure, but based on the evidence presented at trial, she painted a possible scenario. Perhaps Kyle didn't want to eat his lunch, and Ada, feeling frustrated or distracted by watching a soap opera, might have taken him out of his high chair without noticing the cabinet door was open. The prosecutor speculated that Ada's rage might have triggered the vicious attack on Kyle's head using the cabinet door until it broke, with the door's screws leaving marks on the child. After all the testimonies and closing arguments, the jury went to deliberate. Upon returning, they found Ada Quadros guilty of capital murder of a child under 6 years old. As the verdict was read, Ada's mother, Luz Fernandez, who had traveled from Peru when her daughter was arrested, stood up and shouted that she would free Ada because she was innocent. She proclaimed that there was no evidence to convict her daughter and vowed to start over and appeal. After the jury members left, Kyle's parents showed photographs and videos of their deceased son, recounting his brief 14 months of life from birth to the last photo taken days before his death. Family members spoke about Kyle, while others simply couldn't stop crying. Ada was sentenced the following year in 2006 to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For Ada and her family, giving up was not an option. Her parents immediately started a campaign to appeal the sentence, arguing that Ada's conviction was based on racial prejudice and ineffective public defense. However, appealing required money for legal representation and process costs, which the family did not have. Undeterred, they sought support from various sources, including the Peruvian government, the Peruvian and Latino communities in the United States, and solidarity organizations in Peru. In prison, Ada maintained her innocence and took every opportunity for interviews to assert it. Their persistence paid off, and in 2009, Ada's legal representation filed an appeal, citing 5 specific errors in the initial trial. After reviewing the case, the appeals court dismissed 3 of the claims but agreed with 2. This was enough for the judges to overturn the conviction and annul the trial due to irregularities. Following this decision, Ada's family began another fundraising effort to cover the $100,000 needed for a new trial. It took another 3 years to prepare for the new trial, which began on July 10, 2012, with the selection of 12 jurors from over 100 candidates. The trial took place in Collin County's Justice Hall. The defense argued that Kyle had fallen from the kitchen counter on October 12th, injuring his head, and the situation worsened the next day when Ada, running with the child in her arms, accidentally struck his head on the doorframe. This time, the defense presented testimony from a forensic expert with 40 years of experience. He suggested that some of Kyle's bruises might have been caused at the hospital during catheter insertion to assess brain swelling. The prosecution fiercely challenged this testimony. David Gardner, an employee of the kitchen cabinet manufacturer, also testified for the defense. He proposed alternative explanations for the broken cabinet door, though he didn't entirely rule out that Kyle's head could have been struck against it. A poignant moment in the trial was Mike's testimony, where he described Kyle's last 2 days connected to numerous tubes and machines, eventually being taken off life support and dying in his parents' arms. The defense argued there wasn't enough evidence to convict Ada, but the prosecution highlighted the medical findings and the numerous times Ada changed her story. After the sessions concluded, the jury deliberated for 5 hours, even requesting to listen to the 911 call recordings again. Ultimately, they once again found Ada Quadros, then 33, guilty of capital murder and sentenced her to life imprisonment without parole. Back in prison, Ada joined the prison volleyball team, learned Braille, and won an art contest with a drawing of the Virgin Mary, which she auctioned to raise funds for a new appeal. Ada, from her cell, maintains her innocence, her spirit unbroken as she and her family continue their fight for an appeal, seeking a chance to prove what they believe to be the truth.
During the time that she's been missing, have you looked through her room, looked through her property?
No.
When you were aware that a car had been left behind? Were you aware of any other things that had been left behind that she'd normally have with her?
No, I couldn't find her car keys, which was strange. As they always put in the drawer in the kitchen and they weren't there. So I assumed she had her car keys with her.
Kate Wakefield Prout was born in 1952 in the ceremonial county of Gloucestershire, in the northwest of England, into a traditional family of English farmers. Her parents' names remain unknown, but it is well known that Kate's childhood was spent among the rural activities and games with her two brothers, Richard and Edward. The trio's bond remained strong over the years, but when adulthood arrived, Kate was the only one who pursued a different career path, working as a school teacher. During this period, both of her parents passed away. After settling the inheritance issues, the siblings divided the estate. By 1999, Kate, unmarried and childless, decided to retire early. She sold her share of the houses, intending to rest, enjoy the vast greenery, and spend more quality time with Richard and Edward. She also planned to indulge in her favorite hobbies, being near the beach, surrounded by animals, and arranging flowers. Kate moved to the countryside to live with her brothers, who were engaged in farming. At 48 years old, tall, blonde, green-eyed, and intellectually accomplished, Kate was very attractive. During this time, she met a younger neighbor, Adrian Prout, who was going through a difficult period after ending a long relationship and caring for his teenage daughter, Laura. Edward allowed Adrian to temporarily live in a mobile home on their property. In gratitude, Adrian helped with the farm work, and Edward admired him for his business acumen and drive. Kate and Adrian quickly hit it off, fell in love, and got married in September 2000. They bought a lovely house together, but sold it 4 years later when they received an excellent offer. With the proceeds, they realized a dream by purchasing 115 hectares on the outskirts of Red Marley Dabito, a beautiful area. In 2004, the couple moved to Red Hill Farm in Red Marley, investing a significant amount of $1.2 million. The plan was for Adrian to manage the farm, continue his piping business, and organize pheasant hunting events, which were highly prized by wealthy British landowners. With Adrian's dedication and Kate's efforts in public relations and catering, their hunting events, which adhered to conservation rules to protect wildlife, became very popular. However, the harmony in their marriage began to falter when Laura, Adrian's 17-year-old daughter, moved in with them. Initially, the tensions were typical for having a teenager in the house. However, things worsened when Laura's boyfriend started spending a lot of time at their home. One day in 2006, Kate prepared an elaborate lunch for the four of them, but Laura and her boyfriend decided to eat elsewhere at the last minute. Frustrated and at her wits' end, Kate confronted them with everything she had been holding back. The argument was so intense that Laura decided not to live on the farm anymore. This incident strained Kate and Adrian's relationship further, leading to frequent and heated arguments. The situation escalated to the point where Adrian, in a fit of anger, pushed Kate against a truck. Adrian pushed Kate with such force that she hit the metal siding of a truck. Determined to leave him, she packed a bag with her essentials and went to stay with her brother Richard. However, a few weeks later, they reconciled and Kate returned to Adrian. The peace was short-lived. On February 1st, 2007, Kate called her brother Richard again, revealing that Adrian had been arrested for domestic violence. During a brutal argument, plates were thrown, hitting Kate on the head, and the confrontation continued in the garden. It ended with Adrian holding her by the neck over an empty pool, threatening to drop her. Despite mutual accusations, there were no witnesses. After this terrifying incident, Kate stayed with Richard and his wife for a considerable time. During this period, she confided in them about Adrian's controlling and abusive behavior. She revealed that despite co-owning their property, Adrian withheld her share of the income, forcing her to rely on her pension for personal expenses. Realizing the marriage was over, Richard and his wife were unaware that Kate had remained in contact with Adrian. In fact, 2 months after the pool incident, Adrian convinced her to meet face-to-face. They reconciled that night, but the happiness was short-lived, and the heated arguments resumed. Determined to protect her financial interests, Kate began documenting numerous details about her marriage in her personal diary, expressing herself in ways she had never done before. The summer of 2007 was tumultuous, and in an attempt to save their marriage, Kate planned a romantic trip to Italy, buying tickets for October. When Adrian backed out at the last minute, Kate invited her sister-in-law instead. Before leaving, Kate made arrangements to ensure Adrian was comfortable at home, including hiring a woman named Diane Bellamy to care for the dogs, plants, and day-to-day tasks. Upon returning, Kate suspected a clandestine romance between Adrian and Diane. Though Diane testified in court that it wasn't true, she admitted that Adrian had attempted to kiss her several times. One evening in late October 2007, while at a bar with friends and clients, Kate, inebriated, began airing her grievances loudly. She accused Adrian of having an affair and criticized Laura, Adrian's daughter. When Adrian tried to calm her, Kate slapped him in front of everyone. The party ended abruptly, and Kate spent the night at a neighbor's house. Following this incident, they seriously considered divorce. Kate sought legal advice and requested an updated appraisal of their shared property, which had significantly increased in value to $1.84 million. Adrian offered her $850,000 in maintenance, but on Sunday, November 4th, 2007, Kate refused. She stated that the only offer she would accept, being generous, was $1.13 million, which she felt was fair. Adrian was furious, knowing that to pay her that amount, he would have to sell the land they had bought 3.5 years earlier, an option he was unwilling to consider. The next day, Monday, November 5th, 2007, Kate was seen at a fruit market in Ledbury, and later, around 3:30 p.m., contacted her bank. After withdrawing $21,000, she rejected Adrian's financial settlement in the divorce negotiations. What happened next has been pieced together as follows. Around 5:30 p.m., they argued in one of the tourist lodges they offered to hunting enthusiasts on their property. Adrian was preparing for a pheasant hunt with clients scheduled for the next day. Knowing this, Kate threatened to disrupt the event and embarrass him in front of everyone unless he agreed to her demands. Furious, he remained steadfast in his position. Kate reminded him that the property was purchased largely with her father's inheritance. The argument escalated until Adrian grabbed her by the neck with both hands and squeezed with all his strength. After about 15 seconds, Kate fell to the ground, lifeless. Realizing he no longer had to divide his fortune, Adrian went to the main house, sat in a chair, poured himself a whiskey and savored it. A while later he returned, wrapped Kate's body in a curtain and some large white plastic sheets, put her body in the trunk of his truck and drove to a local bar for a few beers. By the time he returned to the car, it was dark. He then drove to a wooded area on the outskirts of their pheasant hunting grounds and dug a grave about 5 feet deep and as long. Finally, he buried the body and left. With no news from his sister and unable to reach her by phone, Richard asked a mutual friend who lived nearby to check on her. The friend found the door unlocked and Kate's car parked outside, but no sign of either Kate or Adrian. Like Richard, the friend couldn't reach them on their cell phones. Richard went to the house and waited with his friend for Adrian to return. When Adrian finally arrived, he claimed he hadn't seen Kate for days. Shocked by his response and his evident coldness, Richard pressed him. Adrian defended himself, saying he hadn't looked for her because he didn't consider her missing. He thought she was just keeping her distance. Under Richard's insistence, on November 10, 2007, Adrian reported Kate's strange absence to the police. Despite launching an extensive search of the farm and its surroundings, the authorities found no trace of Kate. The last confirmed sighting was on Monday at the fruit market. After that, nothing. Given the peaceful nature of their village and Kate's popularity with neighbors, the situation was deeply troubling. No one in the village suspected Adrian. As a wealthy, middle-aged businessman, they believed he had too much to lose to harm his wife. However, the police couldn't ignore his connection to the missing woman. On Sunday, November 11, 2007, Adrian was brought in for questioning. The police immediately noticed some peculiar details. Simultaneously, a search of the couple's property revealed that Kate had left without taking anything: no jewelry, clothes, money, or credit cards, not even her car, which was still parked there. It was highly unusual. 3 days after the initial interview, authorities began to suspect the worst. By then, they were considering several possibilities. The first was that Kate had left for some reason and, after encountering harm, was unable to return or contact her family. The second was that she had left deliberately and didn't want to be found. The final, more sinister scenario was that a crime had occurred, either an abduction or something worse. This launched one of the largest search operations in Gloucestershire, involving over 60 officers. Additionally, the same trained dogs used in the search for missing British girl Madeleine McCann were deployed. Dozens of police officers combed the grounds while helicopters equipped with infrared cameras and tactical police divers scoured the ponds. To grasp the scale and difficulty faced by the search team, the estate spanned over 250 acres, equivalent to approximately 240 American football fields, each measuring 1.32 acres. And this was only a fifth of the cultivable land, which also included at least half the area covered by woodland. Initially, officers identified over 100 areas where a body could be buried, but ultimately ruled them all out. They also searched inside Kate and Adrian's home and around the property's perimeter, using specialized dogs. Despite the challenges of searching without a body, the dog indicated a spot near the patio, which, according to its handler, suggested a body had been there at some point. This result strengthened investigators' belief that Adrian was the prime suspect, but without solid evidence, there was little they could do. Around this time, Diane ran into Adrian at a bar. Believing he was devastated like everyone else, she expressed her support. To her surprise, Adrian responded with absurd statements, claiming that Kate had been taken away without specifying by whom, and he asked her not to ask further questions. On November 27, 2007, Adrian was arrested, and simultaneously, a second search of the vast property was conducted using helicopters equipped with thermal sensors. After hours with no results, Adrian was released without charges. While outsiders believed Adrian was incapable of harming anyone, Kate's brothers suspected foul play and thought Adrian's hands were stained with blood. These suspicions seemed validated as Adrian continued his life as if nothing had happened. In fact, a month after Kate's disappearance, Adrian met Debbie Garlick, a 41-year-old divorced mother of two, at a nightclub in Staunton. They quickly developed a romance with Debbie, captivated by his personality, believing his innocence and thinking the police and justice system were wrongly accusing him. The romance thrived in the following weeks and months. In early February 2008, Diane encountered Adrian again and noticed he seemed frightened. Meanwhile, investigators found Kate's personal diary in her car, leading to Adrian's second arrest on February 19, 2008, for suspicion of murder. However, he was released on bail, and Richard and Edward begged him to confess what they believed was already obvious. Spring and summer passed, with each new season deepening the despair of Kate's loved ones, who watched in disbelief as the case seemed to dissolve without progress or answers. The stark contrast was Adrian's idyllic life with his now fiancée Debbie. In February 2009, the police informed Adrian that he was no longer a suspect. Elated, he convinced Debbie to move in with him at the property he had once shared with Kate. However, 3 weeks later, on March 10, 2009, the police knocked on the door to arrest Adrian once more. Although he was jailed for a month, he was again released on bail. Unbeknownst to him, the investigation continued quietly, and shortly after, Adrian was formally charged with the crime. This did not prevent his relationship with Debbie from progressing. Released on bail, they got engaged in June of that year, and by then, Debbie was pregnant. Their daughter was born on January 7, 2010, after a scheduled delivery. Despite the looming criminal charges and the ugly suspicions surrounding Adrian, they maintained the facade of a happy family, with Adrian portraying himself as a good father and husband. The trial began on January 21, 2010, with Adrian proclaiming his innocence. Debbie attended the hearings, bringing their weeks-old baby. One of the testimonies was from Diane, who clarified that, despite Kate's suspicions, there had never been any relationship between her and Adrian. Diane recounted how Adrian had tried to seduce her and detailed his strange behavior after Kate's disappearance. By the end of the third week, in a remarkable effort, the investigation officers convinced the jury that all evidence pointed towards Adrian. Consequently, in February 2010, Adrian Prout was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years behind bars. The verdict also prevented him from profiting from Kate's will, which she had made in his name. Despite the conviction, Adrian's family, friends, neighbors, and especially his fiancée continued to believe in his innocence. They clung to the idea that without a body, there was no crime or valid accusation. Supporters rallied to free him. Laura, Adrian's eldest daughter, started a social media campaign, while Debbie's daughter from her first marriage did something similar, gathering nearly 500 signatures for his release. Debbie, holding their daughter, campaigned tirelessly and even offered a $14,000 reward for any information proving Adrian's innocence, money she had inherited from her father. Desperate to clear her partner's name, Debbie convinced Adrian to take a lie detector test. She challenged him, saying he had nothing to lose if he was innocent. Confident as always, Adrian agreed, believing he could outsmart the machine. Debbie, hopeful for his release, hired polygraph expert who visited the prison in Lancashire. Adrian appeared calm and confident, stating he was doing it for Debbie. However, Adrian failed the test, and the expert informed him of the results. The expert then called Debbie, who was shocked and in disbelief. Debbie needed answers, so she visited Adrian in prison to hear the truth from him directly. Still harboring a sliver of hope that it was all a misunderstanding, Debbie was devastated when Adrian confessed the terrible truth. In shock, she listened to his pleas not to leave him but knew she had to be resolute. The burden and anguish were immense, but Debbie contacted the investigators and told them everything. The homicide detectives interrogated Adrian again and finally obtained the long-sought confession. All that remained was to locate Kate's body. On Friday, November 18, 2011, authorities took Adrian to the farm. Handcuffed, Adrian led them to a wooded area within the pheasant hunting grounds and indicated where he had buried Kate. Despite the directions, the search was challenging, requiring ground-penetrating radar and search dogs. A forensic archaeologist also assisted in the delicate task. On the 5th day of digging, they found what appeared to be Kate's remains. Richard and Edward were the first to be notified, and although they were informed that formal identification was still pending, the news brought them a sense of closure. The doubts, anguish, and exhaustion they had endured for 4 years gave way to a feeling of relief. This relief grew when the forensic team confirmed the remains were indeed Kate's. The Gloucestershire police broke the news to the press and offered Richard and Edward a chance to speak about their harrowing experience over the past 4 years. Richard and Edward emphasized the difficulty of knowing who was responsible for Kate's disappearance while being unaware of the fate Adrian had chosen for her. They expressed their only desire was to give Kate the rest she deserved and to move forward with their lives. When asked about their feelings towards Debbie, Richard acknowledged that she was now in a position similar to theirs, finally forced to face a terrible truth. The family held Kate's funeral on January 4th, 2012, choosing to keep it strictly private. It had been 4 years and 2 months since her brutal murder, but Richard said they were relieved to have closure. By then, the veil that once clouded Debbie's judgment had lifted, and she understood the manipulative nature of Adrian. In media interviews, Debbie stated she was certain Adrian had used her and their young daughter to portray a false image of a responsible and loving family man. As of 2024, the once powerful English landowner remains behind bars. The farm was sold by Kate's brothers, with the proceeds going to a local hospital and to Kate's nieces and nephews,